I had been craving some time alone for months now, so when I finally got a 3-day weekend, I packed up my tent, my old camping stove, and my dog, and headed for a stretch of river that I'd discovered years ago but had never camped at. It wasn't really even on most maps from what I could tell, but it was just a bend in a narrow, fast-moving stream tucked into a tree line, about 2 hours outside of town. There was no cell service there, no trails leading directly to it, just silence and peace and quiet. So I parked at a dirt pull-off, hiked in a mile or so, and found the spot exactly as I remembered it. Pebbly bank, heavy canopy overhead, the water cold and clear as glass, and Jasper sniffed along the edge, tail wagging, and I felt that rare kind of calm that only comes from real solitude. The first night felt like every other camping trip that I've done. I pitched the tent under a stand of pines, cooked some noodles on the little stove that I brought, and sat on a log to watch the sun go down. The river made a soft, steady noise like white noise on a radio, and it was peaceful. So peaceful, in fact, that I almost fell asleep sitting up there. I crawled into my sleeping bag at around 10 p.m. and Jasper curled at my feet. The air smelled like damp moss and smoke from my fire that night, and sometime after midnight I woke up to a bit of a sound. Not loud and not even startling, but just a bit different, I guess. It was coming from the river, it seemed. It didn't sound like rushing water anymore. It was softer, almost like a person walking at a distance. I sat up and listened, but then it stopped. Or maybe it just blended into the normal sound of the water or something. But either way, I figured that it was my imagination and maybe the wind or a trick of the half-sleep that I was in, and so I just went back to bed. The second day was warm and bright. I spent most of it hiking up the river and fishing a bit. Jasper played in the shallows and everything was beautiful and normal. But by the time that the sun went down, I noticed the woods seemed quieter than normal. Like there was no insects and no birds and just the water sound. I built a small fire, ate, and turned in early that night. It must have been around 1 a.m. when I woke up again, but this time the sound of the river was different. In fact, I heard whispering. Not any words that I could make out, but definitely a clear cadence, like hushed voices from a nearby room. At that, I unzipped the tent, careful not to wake Jasper, and stepped out. The air was cold enough to bite, my breath fogging into the beam of my flashlight. The water, it looked normal, but the whispering grew clearer the closer that I got to it. Still low and still faint, but now with an odd rhythm to it, as if several people were talking at once. Then, for a split second, I could have sworn that I heard my own name, clear as day, just above the rush of the water. I spun, shining the light along the tree line, but there was nothing but black trunks and mist. There was no movement, and nobody there. Jasper finally padded out of the tent, hackles up but silent, which scared me more than barking would have, I guess, but I backed away from the river, zipped us both back up into the tent, and I sat there listening until the whispering seemingly faded. As you can probably imagine, too, I barely slept the rest of the night. By the third day, I was pretty much ready to leave early, but something about packing up felt like admitting that I was spooked, and I told myself that I was just imagining stuff. So I hiked a bit, cooked dinner, and tried to ignore the growing heaviness in the air. It was almost as if the forest was holding its own breath, in fact. I went to bed at dusk that night, fully dressed and boots still on. I admit that I was a bit spooked, but I was also very tired after a very restless night. Jasper too seemed a little bit unsettled, shifting in his sleep like he was sensing something every now and then. Well, around midnight the whispering began again, but louder this time. And not just whispers now, but definitely distinct words mixed with the sound of rushing water. They were speaking faster this time, overlapping like a crowd of people murmuring in a panic. I unzipped the tent, just enough to peek out. The river wasn't smooth anymore either. It was churning, though there hadn't been any rain. The mist was rising off of it, thick and curling, and on the pebble shore, just at the edge of my fire's dying glow, I could now see shapes. Not solid, but more like outlines, I guess I would say. I couldn't make out any faces, but there were definitely at least 4 of them, tall and thin, standing motionless and facing my camp. I shut that zipper up so fast that it actually snagged a bit. The voices, they didn't stop too. They got clearer, now speaking in fragments of sentences. Not English, but something else that I couldn't make out. Then, over all of it, my name began, drawn out, whispered by something right next to the tent wall at one point. Jasper started whining and pawing at the fabric, and that was what actually broke me in the end. I grabbed my flashlight and keys and I yanked the tent open and we just bolted. I didn't even pack up. I left everything but my wallet and Jasper's leash there. And as we scrambled up the path to the car, the whispers followed us, fading in and out behind us, and I swear that I could still hear my name on the wind all the way up the trailhead. But when we finally reached the car, Jasper jumped inside without hesitation. I drove until we hit cell service, not stopping once to even look back. It's been almost a year now, and my gear is still out there, probably scattered or washed downstream by now, but I haven't gone back to get it, and I certainly am not planning to either. I really don't know how to describe what happened out there without sounding completely unhinged, but for the most part of my childhood, my family lived in an old double-wide trailer on 10 acres of scrubland in rural New Mexico. It wasn't a ghost town or a junkyard by any means, but a few mesquite trees here and there, and a long gravel driveway that ended at our front porch. We ran everything off of solar power and well water, and our nearest neighbor was over 4 miles away. Out there, if somebody came down your driveway, you pretty much either knew them or you had a problem. Now, the trailer was laid out in a straight line, my bedroom and the living room on one end, kitchen and laundry in the middle, and my mum and stepdad's room at the far side. Even as a kid, there were 2 parts of the house that I couldn't stand being in, the laundry room and my parents' bedroom. Nothing specific ever happened in them at first, but they just sort of felt wrong, like stepping into a room where someone had just been arguing and left. The first thing that I remember clearly happened when I was about 9. My mum was down on the property collecting leaves for the garden when my stepdad was working in his shop. I was alone inside playing in my room when I heard heavy boots crossing the hallway. My stepdad always wore steel toe or cowboy boots, and I could tell the difference, but these sounded like his work boots for sure. Thinking that he had come inside to get me, I peeked out, but nobody was there. I went running outside to ask what he wanted, and he hadn't left the shop. 2 nights later, I woke up to footsteps on the porch this time, and this time they were loud enough that I sprinted down the hallway and woke my mother up. My stepdad got up and grabbed his gun and went outside. Again, you don't expect people here, but there was nothing. But the pattern kept going for weeks. Boots at around 6 p.m. or at around midnight, circling the porch, and then they were gone. And then, randomly, after about 2 months, it just stopped as suddenly as it had seemingly begun. When my mum got pregnant with my brother, that was when the house shifted. It was like small pranks started happening on a schedule almost. In the mornings, we'd find one of the new baby toys in the center of the living room, a different toy each time. At first, they blamed me, but It happened while I was away too, and that was weird. They blamed the cat, we closed lids, we rearranged things, but it kept happening for months and again then just sort of stopped randomly. At the same time, we would hear rustling in a bag of cans hanging from the china cabinet. We would always set traps expecting mice, but again there was nothing. And when the toys stopped, the rustling stopped too. One night, late into the pregnancy of my mother, she got up to use the bathroom, and from the foot of the bed, you could see straight through the double doors into the living room, and she swore that she saw a man sitting on the couch. Curly blonde hair, blue plaid shirt, jeans, and work boots. She literally gasped upon seeing him, grabbed her housecoat, and shook my stepdad awake. And when he got up, the man was gone. To this day, though, she swears that she saw him clearly, and my stepdad later said that it sounded like his grandfather, who had died years before. After my brother was born, though, the house just felt heavy. I don't mean a little spooky, I mean that you get a weight in your gut walking through certain rooms. We would see shadows sliding along the walls, hear footsteps on the roof, lights would flick on randomly at night, small things tipped over that had no reason to fall, and sometimes there was nothing. The place would feel empty for days, even peaceful. And then that feeling would return like a thunderhead rolling in, and you would know it. My brother's toys became the center of everything too, which is weird. He had a sort of slow, noisy toddler-RC car, and one afternoon during his nap, we heard the car rumbling out of the hallway into the living room. It rolled into the entertainment center and just sort of stopped. My mum went to check on it, and my brother was asleep and the remote had no batteries in it. That car as well would keep starting itself like that for months. And then came a toy tow truck that opened like a flashlight when you pressed a button. It would activate on its own too, even without batteries. We were poor and swapped batteries between toys, so sometimes there really weren't any in there. And the last thing that pushed us over the top happened when I was about 14. I was sitting in my stepdad's recliner, my mum on the couch. The bag of cans started moving again like they always did. We ignored it, thinking cat or mice again. But then a green plastic organizer bin sitting on top of a storage rack by the kitchen literally flew off and hit me in the head, hard enough to leave a lump for about a week. My mum saw it happen too, and we instantly went outside and waited until my stepdad came back home because we were just too afraid to be there anymore. We tried to rationalize everything, bad wiring, wind, imagination, but nothing explained how the activity came and went in waves, or how something literally flew across the room without anyone touching it. Sometimes the house felt completely normal, I'll admit that, but other times it felt crowded, and sometimes it felt like there was more than just one presence too, almost like separate moods were constantly drifting in and out of this place. We've never called it a haunting. My family started saying the land cycles instead, like it's quiet and then active and then quiet again. It's not near a graveyard or a church or anything like that. It's not marked or sacred ground, and we're not religious or into anything paranormal by any means. But the pattern, it's just never changed. Even now when I visit my stepdad, the rooms still feel different every time that I walk through them. I've lived in other places since then, and nothing's been like that trailer. Out there, isolation makes you second guess what you see, but it also makes you sure of what you hear, and there's no one for miles, and you know the sounds of boots on your porch. It isn't just traffic or pipes or a neighbor's stereo. It just is what it is. And when a toy without batteries literally rolls out of the hallway on its own, it's hard to just shrug that off as city noise or imagination. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time wandering in the woods behind my parents' house. The forest there is dense but familiar to me, a place where I knew every tree, every hollow, and every narrow trail. Hidden deep in those woods is an old, worn-down house that my great-grandparents used to live in. As a child, I was always curious about it. I'd explore the perimeter, peek through the broken windows, and imagine what life must have been like when it was full of people. Even as a teenager, I would occasionally sneak back there to see if I could find old signs of their life, rusted tools, remnants of furniture, or scraps of paper left behind. Nothing strange ever happened in those woods, at least nothing that I noticed. Like the occasional deer, a fox, or a distant owl call were the extent of it really. I felt safe there. The trees in the fields had a rhythm, a calm that I associated with home. But that all changed about a year ago, when I was visiting my parents for a weekend. Now, I decided to go back into those woods just like I used to. I brought nothing but my dad's old hunting binoculars and my thoughts, and I wanted to see the view from this old hunting blind, a tree structure that overlooked the field just past the old house. I climbed up carefully, settled into the blind, and let my eyes sweep across the clearing. The wind was light, the field quiet, and for a while, it felt like any other ordinary afternoon in the woods. Then I heard it. At first, it was almost imperceptible, a quick, sharp whisper that came from behind my right ear. As soon as I heard it, though, I froze. The words were clear, distinct, and unmistakably familiar. It sounded like my dad. "It's time to leave." The voice was low, urgent, almost harsh, and unlike anything that I'd ever heard from him. My dad, he just doesn't really whisper. He speaks slowly, deliberately, and with a calm tone. This wasn't him. My stomach instantly tightened as my head whipped around, trying to catch movement. But there was nothing, no one. Just the branches swaying slightly in the breeze, the field stretching out in front of me, and the faint rustle of leaves. I froze in place, every nerve on edge, my mind racing. Was it an animal? A branch scraping the blind? My imagination playing tricks? But the voice was so human and so specific. I couldn't explain it. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, gripping the edges of the wooden platform, my eyes fixed on the field as if staring could somehow protect me. 30 minutes must have passed, and I didn't dare move. Every sound of the forest, the distant crow, the wind through the pines felt amplified, like the woods themselves were watching. And then, in the distance, I saw him. My dad walking across the property, heading toward the old house. Well, relief and confusion surged at the same time. I scrambled down from the blind and I ran to meet him, my heart hammering. "Hey, Dad," I said breathlessly. Were you back there a few minutes ago? Did you say anything about leaving?" He looked at me, genuinely confused. "No," he said slowly. "I've been over by the field near the shed." "Why? Are you okay?" I didn't answer, because honestly I couldn't. I knew that I hadn't imagined it, but the rational part of my mind screamed that there was no explanation. We stood there in the late afternoon, the old house looming silently behind us. I glanced at it and felt the air tighten, heavy in a way that I hadn't felt in years of wandering those woods. That night, I couldn't shake the memory. I kept replaying it over and over in my head, thinking that maybe the wind had shifted, maybe my brain had played a trick on me or something. But I knew the voice had been there, right there, close enough that I could feel its urgency on the back of my neck. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't have to. I just knew that something in those woods had shifted. Something had been lying dormant for decades and wanted me to leave. I've been back to that hunting blind a few times since then, but I never stay long. I don't know what I heard, and I also don't want to find out. The old house is still there, crumbling and quiet, but every time that I look at it now, I feel that same tension, the same urgency, as if whatever whispered to me is still waiting, watching and ready to speak again. Even now, I still cannot explain it. I don't know if it was a voice from someone who once lived there, a residual echo in the woods, or something else entirely. All I know is that day, it changed the way that I look at that forest, the old house and the space around me, and I certainly have not been able to forget that whisper, the one that said, "It's time to leave." I live in Appalachia, in a small house on the edge of dense woods. I follow all of the rules about safety, drawing the blinds at night, rarely going outside after dark, and avoiding the forest entirely for the most part. I've lived here my whole life, and growing up, the woods were always a place of quiet exploration. Birds, deer, and raccoons were normal, even comforting. But there's one night, years ago, that changed the way that I see this place entirely. I was 16 at the time, and it was late fall. My family and I had the routine of leaving food out for the wildlife, grain, corn, and a little bit of leftover fruit. I remember standing at the back door, holding my spotlight, scanning the woods for movement. I had the beam pointed into the shadows, looking for eyes reflecting back. And at first there was nothing, just the usual rustle of squirrels, the snap of dry leaves underfoot, familiar and harmless sounds. But then I saw something. It was standing near a stand of thin pines, maybe 50 yards away. Upon seeing it, I sort of stood still. At first I thought that it was a trick of the light, some twisted branch, but it moved. It was tall. Too tall for any human, and impossibly thin. It was pale, almost a sickly blue in the glow of my spotlight. It also didn't seem to have any eyes, or at least I couldn't see any. Its skull-like face stared directly at me, or at least it felt like it was staring. I instantly knew that something was wrong and felt a chill run through me. I gripped the spotlight harder and it bolted, not like any animal, but in long, unnatural strides, gliding into the darker parts of the forest where the light didn't reach. Genuinely too, my heart almost jumped out of my chest. In fact, I almost dropped the spotlight. My first thought was that it was just a trick of my imagination, exhaustion or fear, but I knew soon after that it wasn't, that what I saw was real. In any case, I ran inside, slamming the door and locking it behind me. I couldn't stop thinking about the shape, the movement, the way that it looked at me. I told my parents, but they dismissed it, chalking it up to me being a scared teenager or exaggerating what I'd seen. For years after that too, I stayed away from those woods at night. I drew the blinds, kept my porch light on, and never walked near the edge of the forest after dark ever again. The memory of that pale figure, it haunted me for a long time. But I never did see it again, at least not physically. I avoided thinking about it, avoided reading folklore or cryptids, afraid of confirming what I already knew, that something real and dangerous had been out there and it was watching me. But only a few weeks ago, curiosity finally got the better of me. I was listening to a podcast about cryptids and strange encounters in the forests. The host described an experience almost identical to mine. A tall, thin, pale figure, sometimes described as a skinwalker, sometimes as a Wendigo, moving in the woods at night, hunting or observing. Everything in that description The height, the color, their predatory presence, it matched what I saw. It confirmed what I had been afraid to admit. The being, it was real. I started researching, trying to find ways to protect myself and my family. There are stories about leaving protective symbols, keeping fire and light as deterrents, and avoiding interaction entirely. I don't have any Native American ancestry or anything, so I cannot rely on cultural protections passed down through generations. I don't know if there's a single method that works or if it even matters. And even though I haven't seen it in years, I still follow strict rules. I leave no food outside after dark anymore, and keep the house lights on when I go to bed. I don't venture near the forest. Every rustle in the trees, every shadow at the edge of the clearing, it always makes me tense. And I wonder if it's still out there, if it remembers me, or if it's watching. And I also wonder what it would do if I let my guard down. I tell myself that maybe it only came once and maybe it doesn't care about the house anymore. But I've learned not to trust that feeling. I protect my home and my family the only way that I can. Light, awareness, and distance. I know that fear isn't just psychological, it's survival, and I depend upon that. Like I said, I haven't seen the figure again, and genuinely I hope I never do. But living here in Appalachia, at the edge of the woods, I understand now that some things are just better left unchallenged. Some things, no matter how long ago you saw them, it just never leaves you. And some nights when the wind shifts and the trees moan in the darkness, I swear that I can feel it watching again. And I remind myself that it's time to be careful, it's time to stay inside, and it's time to respect the woods in ways that I never thought that I would. Almost 10 years ago now, I went on a nighttime trip with a friend to one of my favorite local historical cemeteries. It wasn't for mischief or thrill-seeking or anything. It was mostly just curiosity. My friend shared my interest in old folklore and witchy things, and we often explored places like this, trying to feel the history and the energy of old sites. I've always been highly sensitive to spirits in some way. Sometimes I see things that others don't, or feel presences that cannot be explained. It's certainly not consistent, and I usually dismiss it as nothing, but that night, I just couldn't. The cemetery, it was quiet, almost unnaturally so. The paths were winding and uneven, flanked by rows of weathered gravestones that leaned with age. Moonlight was scarce behind the thick canopy of trees, and the air was damp and slightly musty. As we walked up a hill toward the center, I noticed a large old tree, its roots twisting over the soil like arthritic fingers. Beneath it was a water spigot connection, a relic of practical use from decades ago, and several roads branched out from this spot, forming a sort of natural intersection. Something about that tree drew my attention, though. And it was when I was looking towards this tree that I saw a shadow figure moving in slow, careful circles around the base of the tree. I froze, and I noticed that the figure was short, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall. It looked cloaked, as if draped in a heavy, dark fabric, but it had no discernible head. Its form was fluid, almost like a silhouette that hadn't entirely solidified into matter yet. What struck me the most, though, was its awareness. It wasn't hiding or sneaking, and it definitely noticed me. Every time that I shifted my gaze, it seemed to adjust, circling the tree in a way that was deliberate, aware that it was being observed. Now, it was definitely not human. Not young, not old, not good or bad. It simply just was. I felt neither fear nor hostility, but just a strange magnetic curiosity. It seemed perplexed by my ability to see it, I would guess, like I had accidentally crossed some unseen boundary. I whispered to my friend to stay quiet, but they couldn't see it. Their voice was hushed, wondering if I was joking. I shook my head, trying to gesture subtly, and the figure's attention remained on me. For several minutes it circled, pausing behind the tree and reappearing. The shadows of its movement seemed to distort the ground slightly, but not in a way that I could explain. It was almost like the air itself bent around it, like gravity was bending around it. Eventually, my friend grew restless, and I felt the figure's attention shift as if acknowledging that our presence was now intruding. Slowly, almost reluctantly, it stepped behind the tree, and that was when it vanished from sight. I don't remember it leaving the cemetery, just disappearing as quietly as it seemed to have appeared. And I have never seen anything like it since. For years, I tried to rationalize the experience, as I do all of mine. It wasn't a prank, though, and it definitely was not an animal, and I wasn't imagining it either. I've had other ghostly experiences too, but this one, it felt different. Less about spirits tied to a person, and more like encountering something entirely independent. Something that exists in the space between, unseen by most and aware but not human. Since that night, I avoid the cemetery at night too. I've gone during the day and it feels completely ordinary then. But that tree, its roots, the spigot, the crossroads, it holds a memory that I cannot shake now. I sometimes wonder too if that figure is still there, circling silently, waiting for someone sensitive enough to notice again. Or maybe it only appears to those who can see the edges of the world, and most pass without ever really realizing it exists. I've told a few close friends about it, but nobody can identify it. Some suggest that it might have been a residual energy, a shadow tied to the history of the cemetery. Others have mentioned folklore about protective spirits, guardians, or watchers that appear at crossroads. Nothing fits exactly, but even now, years later, I think about that night when I walked past the cemetery. I remember the lack of sound around the tree, the way the air seemed heavier, the way that the shadow moved with impossible awareness. It wasn't malicious, but it was completely alien, I guess is the best way to put it. I keep coming back to the same question too. What did I really see that night? And if it's still there, waiting quietly in the darkness, what does it want from the few that can notice it? Or does it want anything? And most importantly, what on earth is it doing? I live in a rural area, far from the nearest town. The roads are dirt here, the nearest neighbors are miles away, and most nights are quiet, except for the usual forest sounds, crickets, owls, wind brushing through the trees. Some days it's peaceful, other days it's not. It all started subtly at first too. I would hear a faint shriek while doing chores or walking outside, but I always assumed it was an animal, a coyote or a fox, something wild that got too close to the river on the cliffs to the west of my house. But soon I realized that it wasn't like any animal that I'd ever heard. The sound, it was human. The first time that I noticed, I was tending the vegetable garden near the edge of the yard. Luna, my husky, was wandering nearby, and without warning, a scream rang out from the direction of the cliffs. It was sharp, high-pitched, and full of fear. Luna's ear shot up, her head pivoting toward the sound. My stomach sank. I froze, listening. The scream faded after a few seconds, leaving only the wind and the rustling leaves. I called out to Luna, trying to calm myself down, and she came to me, tail tucked slightly between her legs. My first thought was that someone might have fallen near the cliffs, but I told myself that it had to be pretty far away. The nearest accessible trail is almost a mile downstream. Surely there would have been someone around if a person had screamed like that. But it didn't stop. Every day, around different times, I would hear it again. One morning, while making a coffee, a scream echoed from the cliffs. I rushed to the window, heart hammering, but I didn't see anything, just the river shimmering under the sun and the trees swaying in the wind. Luna barked and growled, staring intently toward the cliffs like I was. I tried calling a friend on the phone to listen, but when I held it out, they heard nothing, not a single sound. That was when it started to make me question my own sanity, really. So I invited some friends over, hoping that someone could corroborate what I was hearing. We sat on the porch, and like clockwork, a scream erupted from the cliffs. Everyone jumped. I pointed towards the river and the cliffs, but no one else heard it. They looked at me like I was joking. Even Luna barked at the empty space, snapping me out of my fear for a moment, but it just didn't feel like enough. I started trying to record the sounds of my phone, hoping to capture evidence. Sometimes I did catch a faint wail, though it always came out muffled and sort of distorted, as if it wasn't meant to travel beyond that spot. Other times, my recordings caught, nothing at all. The inconsistency, it terrified me too in a way that is hard to explain. I called the police several times. They were patient, polite, and skeptical, but they sent officers to check the cliffs and the river below, combing through the area thoroughly, and there was nothing. No signs of injury, no missing persons, no animals that could produce such sounds. Each time they left, I felt a little bit smaller, a little more unsure of myself, really. I've spent countless hours trying to rationalize this. I mean, maybe it is echoes, air currents through the cliffs, or some strange acoustics. Maybe I'm just hearing things that aren't really there. But every time that Luna reacts, every time the hair on the back of my neck stands up, I know it's not my imagination. There's something down there, something that only I and apparently Luna can perceive. I've tried documenting patterns, time of day, weather, my own movements, but there's no pattern, and it's really difficult to predict. Morning, noon, dusk, middle of the night, it doesn't matter. It just sort of happens. The voices change too. Like one day it sounds like a woman screaming for help, the next a child crying. I've heard an older man wailing, and once even a voice so distorted and guttural that I felt physically sick. I stopped trying to go down there myself too. Every time I consider walking toward that river, my hands shake now. The cliffs, they're steep and slick, but that isn't the real reason. It feels like if I step too close that voice, or whatever it is, will notice me. As though whatever is making that noise doesn't want to be approached. I've considered moving. Friends and family think that I should, but the house is mine, built on land that my parents passed down to me, and I love it here. But I also feel trapped by what I hear. And at night, when everything is silent, except for the occasional hoot of an owl or the wind through the trees, I hear them. The screams come unbidden, piercing the darkness, and I wonder if they're warnings or just the echo of something trapped, maybe angry or maybe lost. Sometimes in my worst moments too, I imagine going down to that river, standing on the cliff and trying to see the source of the screams, but I just cannot bring myself to it. I'm honestly too afraid. And yet, every time that sound comes, I feel pulled, as if the voices themselves are calling me closer. I don't know what's there, I don't know why nobody else can hear it, and I don't know how to make it stop too. The only certainty is Luna, who knows something that I don't, but who reacts the same way every time. She looks towards those cliffs, ears up, body tense, refusing to leave my side. All I know is that I've lived here for years, thinking that I understood the quiet, peaceful rhythms of the woods here, and now I realize that I never understood them at all. Something is out there, and it only speaks to a few of us. I don't know if I'll ever find out why or what it is, but I also don't know if I really want to know. A few years ago, I was desperate to get out of the city for a weekend. Work had been crushing me for weeks, every day filled with stress and deadlines, and I felt like I needed to disappear for a night. So on a whim, I booked a small cabin deep in the woods, not through Airbnb this time, but a local rental that I found through a friend's recommendation. I grabbed my dog, packed the bare essentials, and started the drive late on a Friday afternoon. It wasn't far, maybe an hour and a half from the nearest small town, but the route felt like it stretched forever. The gravel roads wound through dense forests, the light fading as I drove, and about 20 minutes from the cabin, I stopped at a convenience store to grab a bottle of wine and some snacks, telling myself that I would have a quiet night. Just down the road, I pulled into a tiny diner, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and picked up some takeout. The town had that sort of sleepy, quiet energy, the type where you feel miles away from the rest of the world, even though civilization is still pretty close. Now, by the time that I reached the cabin, it must have been around 7:45 p.m. The sun was barely above the horizon, enough for me to start a small fire outside. The cabin was tucked off of a gravel road that branched from the main route, a 5-minute drive from the highway, but completely isolated once you were there. It was rustic, but well kept. Electricity, running water, a modern bathroom, and a small kitchen. The windows on every wall allowed a full view of the surrounding trees, the woods pressing close on all sides. I settled in with my dog, sitting by the fire until roughly 11:30. Eventually, I put it out, went inside, and I crawled into bed, scrolling lazily on my phone. The dog, usually calm at night, kept pricking his ears though, staring at shadows outside. I shrugged it off, blaming the noises of the woods and the unfamiliar territory. About 45 minutes after laying down though, I heard something. It was a soft knock at the door. At first, I thought that I must have imagined it too. Late-night nerves, maybe the wind. But then it came again, quicker this time, and panic set in a little bit. I had no cell service, no way to call for help, and the thought raced through my mind, what if it wasn't the wind? What if someone actually made it here? The cabin door was solid, the lock engaged, but there was a window to the side of the porch. Hesitantly, I flicked the porch light on and peered out, and there was a man stood there, his posture casual but deliberate, staring right at me. He didn't seem immediately violent or anything, but his presence set my teeth on edge for sure. It was the timing and the way that he appeared that seemed very strange. I called out through the window, my voice steadier than I felt. "Can I help you?" He tilted his head and motioned toward the door. Then, in a voice roughened by alcohol, clearly, or something else entirely, he said simply, "Come on, let's talk." My pulse raced. I tried to laugh it off, trying to sound confident. No thank you. You need to leave." His eyes flicked toward the woods as if assessing options. Then he said something that I couldn't quite make out, but it sounded like he was trying to come on to me. My mind went into overdrive though. I didn't have phone signal, I couldn't call anyone, and I had a fire extinguisher on the wall, a lighter and a bottle of rubbing alcohol, but that was about it. If he did try to force the door, I really would have to defend myself with nothing. My dog barked, though, low and urgent, his fur raised and the sound vibrating through the cabin. Luckily, or perhaps unnervingly, he simply turned at that and walked away. I didn't see where he went into the dark, just the fading lights of his vehicle in the trees before it disappeared. The rest of the night, I couldn't sleep. The dog was alert at every little noise outside, and I moved furniture in front of the door, checked every window, and stayed up until sunrise. When the first light of the day broke through the trees, I packed up quickly and I left, finally able to get out of there. Even now, I replay that moment in my head. I mean, how did he know that I was there? Had he followed me from the small town 20 minutes away? Did he know about the cabin before I even arrived? I don't know. But how did he navigate the gravel road in near darkness without lights on, without me even noticing? Every time I think about it, I get tight in my chest, and I feel uneasy. The fear, it certainly lingers, sharper than anything that I've ever felt before, or even since then. I still go out in the woods from time to time, but never at night and never alone. I still think about that night often, and I'm just grateful that my dog was there and seemed to deter, well, whatever was about to occur. So we live in a gated complex split into 2 blocks. The community building, which is the mailroom and the gym lobby, and the annex where my unit is. It's the sort of place where people leave small items on the bench and things generally feel safe. Now, I'd ordered dinner and, as I do, I left a note on the delivery app asking the driver to drop the bag at the annex entrance to avoid crossing over to the main lobby. At about 11:10, the app pinged, delivered, and I walked down wearing slippers and the main lobby was dim, with the security light over the desk casting long shadows. There was somebody in the lobby, hunched on a bench, facing the mailroom area. My bag was sat next to him, unclaimed. The dasher, or so I thought, looked up as I approached and said, "Ah, you're here." I said thank you, picked up my food, and I turned to leave. He stood and walked with me though, which I thought was a bit odd until he started talking too much. "I actually live here in the complex. I'm in Building B. What's your unit?" I cut him off with a fake name and tried to move past. But something in my gut flickered. When he reached the elevator, he pretended to press the button and stepped in for a second, then stepped out and casually moved towards the doors to the garage. I decided to avoid sharing the elevator. I didn't want him to know where I lived, so I took the shortcut across the underground garage. It's a straight 2-minute walk that pops you into the annex back entrance. Halfway through the garage, I glanced back. His silhouette was in the lobby doorway. He hadn't taken the elevator, and instead he had followed me into the garage. My heart kicked into my throat, and that was when I ran. I ran toward the stairwell instead of the elevator because the elevator, it was still arriving and I felt like I was trapped. I flew 2 flights up with my food bag swinging, lungs burning, and when I reached the annex corridor, I slowed, and I thought that I'd lost him. That's when the conservatory doors slammed behind me, and he came through like he had been waiting for me, breathless and angry. He shoved a crumpled receipt at my face. He was loud and accusing. "That's my food. You stole my delivery. That number on the receipt is my unit." He pressed so close that I could see a small scar at the corner of his mouth. But my voice felt tiny and flat because I was trying not to panic. I told him that he'd delivered it to the lobby, and that the printed number was the order number, not an apartment number. It meant nothing to him, though. He kept coming forward. What changed everything was what I saw in his right hand when, in the middle of his rant, he dropped his wallet and a small folding pocket knife, the kind with a noticeably dark handle. He held it like a man absent-mindedly holds a lighter, thumb over the clasp, finger along the spine, but the flash of the metal was all I needed to see. In the dim light, it looked sharp. It wasn't brand new too, and the blade had a sort of dull edge to it, which in my mind meant that it seemed like he was used to having it ready. I said as loudly as I could, "Stop, you need to leave." He stepped closer and muttered something about eviction and theft. He was watching the receipt like it was proof that he was right, but he was also watching me like he was trying to memorize my face. People sometimes act weird at night, I told myself, but this was definitely different. The man's jaw looked set, his hands moved in like little circles as if practicing a plan. There was a flash of motion at the end of the hall, a resident coming back with a trash bag. The sight of another person momentarily changed his demeanor too. He clicked the elevator button, shoved the receipt at me again like it was a talisman, and got in. I didn't wait. I ran the rest of the way to my door, fumbled with my keys in a panic, and only when I was inside and had the deadbolt latched did my body remember to breathe properly. I sat on the floor, my chest heaving, the takeout untouched beside me. When I looked back toward the garage door, I could see his form in the doorway, a shadow framed by the lobby light, and something like a small metallic glint where his hand rested. I emailed building management immediately with the time, description, and screenshots of the DoorDash confirmation. I also sent a message to the community group asking for help and to be careful. The next morning, I learned security had pulled camera footage and confirmed that a man had loitered in the lobby and moved between the two buildings that night. I also found that the DoorDash dasher had indeed left the bag at the annex door earlier and that this man had waited there. Management took the footage seriously, and the complex sent a notice reminding residents that they should never open doors for strangers and to report suspicious people. That should have made me feel safer, I know, but it didn't. For days, I slept little, flinched at every noise, and replayed the man's face in the way that he held that knife in my mind. I started taking detours to avoid the lobby entirely, ordering food only to pick up outside at a restaurant, and timing my comings and goings to overlap with my other neighbors. My hands shook opening mail, and I cancelled a night shift at work because the thought of walking to the car alone at night made my stomach turn. The worst part isn't the memory of him in the moment, too. It's the nervous calculus that followed. I mean, what if he had pushed me into an elevator? What if he had been brave enough to follow me up the stairs? What if the resident who came by hadn't have shown up? My brain fills those blanks faster than I can slow them, and I just couldn't sleep. I see him sometimes in the security screenshots that the manager shared, a man in a hooded jacket, hands in pockets, the knife barely visible as a bright dot when the light hits its metal, and management said that they were increasing patrols and talked about banning him if he was identified. But until he's gone for good, until the complex feels like mine again, I'm carrying a low-grade panic that wakes me up at 2 a.m. every day. The delivery app now always gets the meet at the restaurant note too. I'm sharing this too because if one small detail can change the tone of an encounter for somebody else, the sight of a knife, the way someone pretends to be a delivery driver, it's worth telling other people what it felt like so they can trust their instincts. If you ever get the sense that someone is following you in a why would anyone care sort of way, don't try to rationalize it in your head. Just get out of there, run toward people or something like that. Make noise, and don't assume that you're overreacting. I didn't, and now I know why that voice inside your chest exists. It's there to keep you alive. I was on a late-night flight heading back to New York after a work trip with a couple of friends. We'd all managed to book seats scattered across the plane, so most of the trip we were just sort of texting each other through the airline Wi-Fi to pass the time. About halfway through the flight, one of my friends messaged me saying something was going on in his row. He explained that he had been stuck in the middle seat, with an older man next to him on the aisle. At first it was nothing unusual, just the awkward silence of strangers squeezed together. But then, he started hearing a strange noise. At first it was faint, but within seconds it became clear. A woman's voice, moaning, loud enough that nearby passengers were shifting in their seats and looking around. My friend leaned over and noticed that the sound was coming from the older man's phone. His earbuds were dangling, but not fully connected, which meant that everyone around could hear what he was watching. My buddy nudged me and quietly pointed it out. The man jammed the jack in properly and the noise cut off. My friend figured that was probably the end of it, but it wasn't. Curiosity got the better of him and he glanced down at the screen. And what he saw wasn't just a risque movie scene. It was unmistakably graphic content, the kind that you would never expect to see played openly on a commercial flight. My friend sent us some updates through text and we all cackled stupid jokes and stuff like, just join him so it doesn't feel awkward, or steal one of his earbuds and make it a bonding moment. We laughed, but the updates kept getting more uncomfortable. You see, the man wasn't just watching. He'd started shifting in his seat, breathing harder, and at one point even reached down and pressed his hand against himself through his pants. This wasn't just awkward anymore. It was crossing into something that could put other people on the flight in a really bad position. So I decided that I had to see it for myself. I got up under the excuse of stretching and made my way down the aisle. When I passed, I saw it clear as day. The screen was tilted at just the right angle that the row behind him could see it too, and there were kids back there. He wasn't subtle about it either. The audio was muffled now that his headphones were plugged in, but his expressions and movements left little doubt about what was going on. What struck me the most, though, was just how nobody was addressing it. A flight attendant had walked past and given the phone a glance, but instead of saying anything, she just kept going, like it wasn't worth a confrontation. And that was what set me off. If they weren't going to step in, then I felt like someone had to. So I leaned down toward the man and told him flat out, "You need to turn that off. There are kids sitting behind you." He froze, clearly embarrassed. His face went red. He fumbled with the phone, muttered something that sounded like an apology, and shut the video down. I stood there long enough to make sure that he got the message, then shook my head and I went back to my seat. Afterward, a couple of passengers quietly thanked me for speaking up. Apparently several of them had noticed and felt uncomfortable, but didn't want to be the one to say anything. My buddy, still stuck beside this guy unfortunately, texted me a few minutes later with one last update. The man had switched over to a simple card game app. He kept his phone angled toward the tray table, his posture rigid, like he knew everyone around him was now aware of what had just happened. But the whole thing, it left me unsettled. Not because of what he'd been watching. I mean, people can do whatever they want in private. But because of how casually he tried to bring something private into a public space full of strangers, and even kids. I thought about it the rest of the flight home, how quickly people look away from uncomfortable situations, how easy it is to pretend that you didn't see something. By the time that we had landed, it was just a weird story to tell friends later, but sitting there in the dark cabin, watching him pretend to lose himself in digital solitaire after getting called out like that, it felt like something heavier. Not funny, not shocking, but just really bad. And that's what stuck with me more than anything. How alone he looked in that crowded plane, surrounded by people yet completely isolated, hiding behind a screen that only made everything worse. And I mean, was he just an old fumbling fool that just made a mistake? Or was he trying to groom those kids? I don't truly know, but he did seem to follow that family after we got off the plane for some time. That was weird, and I noticed it too, and so did the parents seemingly. They quickly left after getting their bags, and he was left there looking sort of shaken and confused, like things just didn't go to plan for him. I'm 17 now, but when this happened, I was just 15 and back in Mexico for the first time in years. We'd moved to Canada when I was 13, but that summer my mother insisted on visiting some family for a month to reconnect with them. We stayed in my grandparents' old house, the one that I had grown up in before moving away. The neighborhood had always felt familiar and safe to me, even if it wasn't exactly fancy. That afternoon, we were heading to see some relatives. My father and younger brother were driving over from another part of the city to pick us up. But because of a temporary roadblock near my grandparents' house, we'd agreed to meet them at a small plaza about a block away, the same plaza where I'd played as a kid. On my way there, my mother remembered that she had to return a container to a family friend who lived right on our street. "Go on ahead," she told me. "I'll only be a minute." We both thought nothing of it. I mean, I knew the area well, and I'd only be alone for maybe a couple of minutes. As soon as I turned the corner away from my grandparents' house, I noticed a man leaning against a beat-up grey pickup parked on the curb. He was smoking and scrolling through his phone, nothing unusual. But as I walked past, I felt that sort of sensation on the back of my neck, the kind you get when somebody is watching you. I glanced over my shoulder without turning my head fully. The man had gotten into his truck, but the engine was running. The vehicle was rolling forward slowly, keeping its distance but moving when I moved. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he was waiting for someone. But when I sped up my steps just slightly, the truck crept closer, matching me. My heart was pounding so hard that I could hear it now in my ears, but I kept my face calm. I didn't want to give away how scared I was, I guess, but then the truck lurched forward, closing the gap between us, and pulled alongside of me. The passenger side window was down, and he started calling something out in Spanish. His tone wasn't friendly either, more like baiting, I guess, but I ignored him, staring ahead at the plaza entrance. When I broke out into a run, he opened the door and jumped out, and for a split second, I thought that he was about to grab me. He got about 3 or 4 steps in my direction before he just stopped, cursed under his breath, and climbed back into the truck. He slammed the door and drove around the block instead. I didn't stop running until I reached the plaza. My legs were shaking so badly that I nearly tripped over the bench when I sat down. I texted my dad, but the cell signal was pretty weak. A minute later, my mum appeared, confused as to why I was out of breath. Before I could even explain, though, that same truck came back around, moving in slow circles around the park. The man never rolled his window down again, but I could see him glancing over at us each time that he passed us. He didn't leave until my father showed up. He's 6 foot tall, ex-military, and still has the posture of somebody who's not easily intimidated. And the moment that my dad stepped out of the car, the truck accelerated and vanished down the side street. I'd lived in that neighborhood for years before moving away, and I'd never been afraid of walking there alone, even as a kid. But that day, it changed something for me. I realized then that it didn't matter that I spoke Spanish fluently, or that I wasn't even a tourist. Being local, it doesn't protect you. I wasn't imagining the danger, and my body hadn't recognized it before my mind did. Later, talking to my cousins, I learned about the stories too. Even a house not far from my grandparents where trafficked women had been found. It's one of the better parts of the city, they told me, as if that made it less frightening. Even now, years later, I think about that truck and that man. I still wonder if he had seen me before too, if he'd followed me from somewhere, or if I'd just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. And whenever I go back to visit my family, I don't walk alone anymore. I don't assume that familiarity means safety anymore. People ask me if I'd do anything differently since then, and the truth is that I did everything that I could in that moment. But if there's one thing that I could tell someone else, it's this. Don't second guess your instincts. If something feels off, then get out of there, even if you do feel a little bit silly. It's better to be safe than sorry, and your fear might be your only warning that you get. I was 16 when all of this went down, in the early 1990s. My girlfriend's family, they had decided to leave town for good. They had landed a rare chance to start fresh, several states away after her father got a job offer that he just couldn't pass up. They packed up their belongings, signing the papers, and left their house sitting empty while the realtor tried to find a buyer. Their place wasn't like the newer, cramped homes that I was used to. It was a sprawling single-story house in a big lot, with a detached garage at the end of a long driveway. The front yard had a single massive tree that shaded the concrete like a huge umbrella, and the backyard had a few smaller ones too, including an old fruit tree with branches that reached the windows. The lots were so far apart that you could go hours without seeing a neighbor too. I'd been helping them load furniture and boxes in the weeks before they left, and on the last day before they drove away, her dad pulled me aside on the front porch with her mum standing nearby. He asked me if I could do him a favor, check on the house a few times a week, maybe even stay overnight occasionally. But people were breaking into empty houses at the time, you see, stealing appliances or squatting and things like this. The only neighbor that they trusted was on vacation, and he didn't want the place looking abandoned for too long. I told him not to worry about paying me, that I'd known them for years and would have done anything to help, really. So he handed me the spare key, gave me his mother-in-law's phone number in case I couldn't reach him directly, and told me to call if anything happened. Now, the first few visits were during the day. I cleaned the kitchen, vacuumed a little bit, wiped down the bathrooms, stuff like this. It felt strange walking through the rooms, though, when they were stripped of furniture like this, but still smelling faintly of their lives. After a few days, I decided to spend the night for the first time. I brought a small cot over, a radio and a couple of old lamps. I chose to sleep in my girlfriend's old room, partly out of habit, I guess, but partly because it felt like the least empty part of the house. I left the kitchen and the bathroom lights on, and I kept the radio playing quietly. I woke up at around 2 a.m., I think, absolutely freezing. Not just chilly, but the kind of cold that seems to come from one spot, like opening a freezer door almost. I got up and checked the thermostat, and I turned the heater on before crawling back into my sleeping bag. The next day, I told a friend at school how cold it had been, and he looked at me a little bit weird, because the night had been pretty mild. Over the next week, I visited more, but mostly during the day. Then, on a Thursday, I decided to stay again. I had school the next morning but figured that I could make it work. This time I brought a tiny black and white camping TV to kill some time with. The signal in my girlfriend's room was pretty bad, to be honest, so I moved to the den at the back of the house. It looked like it had been a patio at one point and then enclosed later. I set up my cot, poured out a hot chocolate from a thermo, and started dozing off with the TV on. And it was around then that I heard a sound from somewhere on the other side of the house. Not a door and not footsteps, but a noise of something, I don't know, like tall and thin falling and sliding, maybe like a broomstick against a wall. I went to check. The mop and the broom in the kitchen pantry were still upright. I walked down the hallway, switching on every light that I could find. The bathroom mirror stretched across the wall, letting me see the hallway behind me. And then I heard a low voice, a whisper just above the sound of my own breathing. I swear that I could make out just a few words, and I remember what her dad said about break-ins. My heart began racing, and I opened the back door and turned on the outside lights. All the doors were still locked, and nothing had been moved. I went back to the den, and my little TV was off now, but I was almost certain that I hadn't touched it. I really didn't sleep at all that night. At school the next day, I told a couple of friends too. They wanted to come with me to check it out, but her dad had been very clear. No visitors and no parties. So I kept my word. For a few days, I only stopped by during the daylight time, and then my girlfriend called. She told me about their trip, and when she asked how I was doing, I sort of hesitated, I guess. I told her about the cold, the noises, the whisper, and she was quiet for a second, and then said, "Yeah, I figured you'd notice eventually." I asked her what she meant, and she said that she had never liked being alone in that house, and when she was younger, she had run to her parents' room at night because she had heard voices or footsteps. She wasn't sure what it was, but it had apparently always been there. Her dad eventually told me that I didn't need to spend the night there anymore. The neighbor had returned and they would keep an eye out, and he asked me to just keep checking in during the day though, and just to keep an eye out. For a while I managed that without any trouble too. But one evening I lost track of time, and I arrived after dark, and I unlocked the front door and turned on a few lights and went to use the bathroom. And while standing at the sink, I swear to you that I caught movement in the mirror. Something dark passed quickly in the hallway behind me, and I spun around shouting hello, but there was nothing. Well, I was completely spooked by that, so I left the house immediately, and I even left the lights on by accident. The next day, her dad asked why the neighbor had seen lights on and someone moving inside at 11 p.m. I told him that I had been there at 7, but I had left well before complete darkness. So whoever or whatever had been in there after that time, it was definitely not me. I did keep going back a few more times after this, but only ever during the day. Then the house sold to a company that flipped properties apparently, and even now, decades later, I still think about that house. I don't know if it was a break-in or I somehow missed something, or if somebody or something else was in that house all along, but all I know is that when I finally handed that key back, I felt a kind of relief that has stayed with me for years now. When I was a teenager, I developed a ritual that nobody in my family knew about. Every few nights, after everyone had gone to sleep, I'd climb out of my bedroom window, not onto the roof, but up a steel ladder that we kept leaning against the side of our shed. From there, I could perch on a flat section and look out over the whole neighborhood, often with an old handheld telescope that my uncle had given me. I didn't do it to spy on people or anything creepy, but it was just the only time that everything felt still enough to notice the details. Streetlights buzzed and flickered. The small grocery store at the corner dumped out its last bag of trash at midnight sharp, and from my perch I had a direct view down a long, crooked back road that led past our home and into the hills. Most nights, too, nothing ever really happened. But then one night, as I scanned down the road, I caught something moving far below. At first I thought it was a dog running loose. It moved low to the ground, but at a speed that made me blink and look again. Then it veered sharply into the middle of the road and started running uphill, straight toward where I was sitting. I steadied the telescope, and what I saw wasn't a dog at all. It was something weird. It was smaller than an adult, but longer-limbed than a kid. Its skin looked pale and tight, like wet paper almost. It didn't run like a person either. Its arms sort of pumped too hard, and its head didn't bob. And even from that distance, I knew instantly that it was looking at me. As you can probably imagine, I was pretty scared by whatever this was, and I backed away from the edge of the roof. I crawled back inside of my window, locked it, and then went downstairs to check that every door was bolted. I grabbed the first heavy thing that I could find, a metal wrench from the kitchen drawer, and stood in the hallway trying to listen. I heard something too. Not running footsteps on the road this time, but something heavier, echoing as if now inside of the house. A rush of movement up the stairwell, then a pause, then the same pounding rush back down. I crept to the front door holding my breath. The noise stopped, and for a second I thought that maybe it just had been my imagination. But then the door handle began to rattle really hard. Something or someone was jerking it up and down like it was trying to figure out the lock or break in. The doorbell rang twice. Then came a series of dull thuds like fists hitting the wood, and I couldn't make myself move. I just stood there clutching the wrench, staring at the door. The noise suddenly stopped, and from the other side came a low sort of like wet sound, almost like somebody gargling water, but not words and not a scream, just a sort of breathy moan. It happened once, and then again, and then after that, nothing. Minutes crawled into hours, and I stayed there until morning light came through the front windows. Only when the neighborhood began to stir did I finally check the porch. The doormat, it was pushed crooked, but there were no footprints, no sign anyone had been there at all. I put the telescope away that morning, and after that I never climbed that ladder again. For weeks afterward too, I would wake up in the middle of the night certain that I'd heard the handle rattle or the moaning start again. It never did, but the memory of something sprinting up that road with its eyes locked on mine, it stayed with me for quite some time. And now, years later, I still wonder what the heck that was, and if I hadn't have climbed down that night, if I had stayed on the roof even a little bit longer, if I would even be here. I didn't grow up thinking that my family home was haunted. If anything, it was the opposite. This was our safe place. My father bought the plot decades ago when the neighborhood was just starting to develop, and the house had been built, patched, and remodeled around us ever since. It isn't falling apart or sitting empty. The streets alive with kids playing and vendors walking by all day. But for as long as I can remember, the house itself has had a way of acting like somebody else is living here with us. The stories go back before I was even born. My aunt, who lived with us all her life because of her disability, still talks about an afternoon when she was about 7. She swears that she was leaning over the second-floor balcony, thinking about jumping down into the yard below, just as a childish dare to herself, when she felt two hands lift her by the waist and set her back against the wall. Now, there was no one else there, she said, and she ran inside crying, and obviously nobody believed her, but she never leaned over that balcony ever again since then. For me personally, it's less dramatic than that, more like a steady string of irritations, I guess you could say. Things I leave on the counter disappear, only to show up right where I left them even minutes later. The doors in the hallway click shut on their own where no windows are open. You'd think that it was just forgetfulness or maybe drafts, until it just happens over and over again, so much so that you actually begin to take notice of it and start actually saying to yourself, yes, I just put this thing here, and then minutes later, inevitably it's gone. My brother's experiences, though, they're different. He avoids certain rooms altogether, especially at night. He always says that they feel wrong, like somebody is standing there waiting for him to step in. I personally don't get that sensation. I can stand outside on the roof at 3 a.m. and feel nothing but the cool air and the quiet street. But it's always been like that. It's like the house sort of singles people out, I guess, reacting to each of us in its own way. But the incident that finally made us both feel completely spooked happened just last month. There's an old wash basin near our front door where we sometimes rinse our hair in the evenings. I was bent over it when a sharp screech rang out behind me, high-pitched, metallic, like chalk being dragged down a blackboard. I spun around, but there was nothing there. I called my brother, and as soon as he stepped up, the sound got louder and closer, and the air suddenly felt heavy, like someone invisible had moved between us almost. Then there was a knock, 3 loud raps right next to our ears, but there was nothing nearby to even knock on. We bolted inside without a word, and since then, smaller things have kept happening too. Like at night, we hear furniture sliding in the empty upstairs room, sometimes a steady dragging sound that lasts for minutes. My father occasionally sees fast-moving shapes darting through the hallways, like shadows of someone running. He's even chased after them once or twice, thinking that they were intruders, only to find empty rooms. The strange part, though, is that none of it feels violent, I guess. Whatever it is, it hasn't really hurt anyone. It startles, frustrates, and confuses, and obviously scares us a bit, but it never crosses into outright danger. It's almost like living with a housemate who refuses to show themselves, but likes to make noise and sort of be annoying. Now that I'm older, I've stopped trying to convince visitors that nothing's wrong, and if something happens, I just sort of shrug it off. If nothing happens, then I don't really bring it up, but the weirdness is just sort of part of the background, I guess. Like the hum of an appliance that you've just learned to tune out. Sometimes, though, usually at night, when the upstairs sounds start or a door clicks shut on its own, I wonder if we've gotten too used to it. Or if one day the invisible presence will finally decide to show itself in a way that we can no longer just brush off. Until then, we keep living here the way that we always have, I guess, trying to act like it's just another quirk of the house. Deep down, though, we all know that it's more than just creaks and drafts. I don't usually talk about this because I know that it sounds like some sort of cheesy creepypasta, but for the stretch of my teenage years, my home life took a turn that I've never been able to explain. I wasn't in a gothic mansion or an isolated cabin or anything like that. Our place sat right above a busy street in a medium-sized German city. The building itself looked ordinary from the outside too, but inside it felt like a strange in-between space, caught between its past life and whatever it is now. My mother and I, we moved into what used to be an office space on the top floor of a 19th century building. The ground level, it still held a private club built by wealthy industrialists in the late 1800s, a mixture of a ballroom, bowling alley and a bar, all with velvet curtains and tarnished chandeliers and everything. It looked like it hadn't been updated since the mid-century, and in exchange for low rent, we took on a lot of the renovations ourselves. When we finished, the apartment looked great too. Fresh paint, warm lighting, our furniture. On paper, honestly, it was perfect. But the upper floors of the building had odd features. We were the only apartment on our level, right below the attic, and the two doors stood out in the stairwell, one heavy door that supposedly connected the neighboring building, and a tiny square door high up on the wall. If you climbed up and opened it, you'd see a sort of crawl space with stone pillars stretching into darkness, far larger than seemed possible, given how tightly the city was built. I would stare into it sometimes too, trying to make sense of it. At first, nothing really dramatic happened in this place, but then I would wake up in the night and, for a few seconds, see something absolutely terrifying hovering near my bed. Once it was a spider the size of my hand. Another time it was a furious pale woman leaning close to my face, teeth bared. Then my eyes would adjust and it was just a crumpled blanket or a coat hanging on a chair. It felt like my brain was playing tricks on me, I guess, and so I just sort of dismissed it all. Other incidences were harder to dismiss though. Like one night, I woke up halfway down the stairwell, lying on the landing in total darkness with my heart racing. I remembered a struggle, a woman's voice screaming, something dragging me, and then just nothing. I ran back to my bed trembling, and when I asked my mother the next morning, she said that she hadn't heard anything. She's a heavy sleeper, admittedly, but still, it rattled me that she didn't hear it. The event that cemented everything, though, that happened when my first boyfriend stayed over. We were alone that night, the apartment locked up, and sometime after midnight, slow, deliberate footsteps began pacing across the attic directly above us. At first, we thought it was a neighbor, but the sound didn't stop. It circled and circled for what felt like hours, and we finally went up to check. But when we did, the attic was completely empty, dust seemingly undisturbed. We went back to my room and tried to settle down a little bit, and just as we started to relax again, the old window in the next room began creaking open and shut over and over again, fast, like somebody was fumbling with the latch a little bit. It lasted a full minute, and then, clear as day, a woman's voice called out hello from the same room. We both heard it, and we both immediately froze. Neither of us had the courage to get up and look, and we stayed in bed, listening to our own breathing until sleep. It finally came in the early hours of the morning. Later, when I tried to dig into the building's history, I found little except for the fact that it was near a former police building used during the war. That could mean anything or nothing, but half the city has some grim connection like that. Around the same time, I developed a bad respiratory illness, and only after we moved out did we discover that black mold was behind the walls of my bedroom. I've told myself that the illness caused the hallucinations, but really, that doesn't explain the footsteps or the window or the voice that my boyfriend heard with me. We've been gone for years now, and I'm healthy again, but when I think back to that apartment, what sticks with me isn't the mold or the club downstairs or even the crawl space. It's just how quickly the place made me question what was real. It's one thing to be scared by your own imagination. It's another thing to have someone else standing next to you, eyes wide, hearing the same things that you're hearing. Sometimes I wonder what's up in that crawl space now behind that little door, whether somebody else actually lives up there, shrugging off the footsteps at night the way that I used to, or if it's still empty and those sounds and things are still occurring. My family and I lived in my childhood home for 15 years before moving into an older house just down the road. We only stayed there for a few months since we were just renting, but shortly after settling in, I began to feel an unsettling presence, as if I was constantly being watched. It filled me with fear and unease, and I developed severe insomnia during this time because of it. The house itself felt very heavy with tension, as my family was going through a pretty turbulent period. The bathroom was upstairs, positioned so that the shadow of anyone standing in front of the mirror would appear on the door. And one night, my dad told me that after finishing a movie, he went upstairs to use the bathroom, and halfway up the stairs, he noticed a shadow on the bathroom door. It appeared to be brushing its hair, and he assumed it was me getting ready for school extra early. He called out my name, and the shadow paused, almost as if acknowledging him, before continuing the hair-brushing motion. When he opened the bathroom door, though, nobody was there. He checked the shower and the storage closets, thinking that I might be playing a prank, but I can assure you I wasn't. He finally went to my room and found me asleep, and this scared my dad enough that he hurried back downstairs and told me that he wouldn't go upstairs again that night. This wasn't the only unsettling experience that we had in that house, though, because one morning when my brother and I were still in school, it was my responsibility to make sure that he got up on time to get ready and catch the bus. And that morning I was downstairs on the family computer, completely absorbed and unaware of how much time had passed. And when I finally checked the clock, I panicked and I bolted upstairs, fully expecting to find my brother still asleep, but to my surprise, he was already awake, sitting up in bed. My first thought was relief. Thank God he's up, quickly followed by confusion. How did he wake up? I asked him, "How did you get up on your own today?" He looked at me confused and said, "What? You woke me up." I froze. "What do you mean I woke you up? Was I being too loud?" He replied, "No, you came into my room, turned on the light and said, 'Hey, it's time to get up,' and then you left." But it wasn't me. I had been downstairs the entire time. I'm sure of it. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened. It never happened before or since then, and I'd love to know what you guys make of this, because I really think that there was something in that house imitating me. Not just because of what I've just shared with you guys, but also the physical and emotional effects that I experienced during this time. I just cannot ignore them. As a young mother, I could never afford much, but there were these low rental units just off of 22nd Street. The owner of this building was basically a bit of a slumlord. I've got to give him some credit though, because he did attempt to renovate and he evicted all of the problematic tenants that used to live there. The building manager was being more picky about who they let into the building now too, so that was why the apartment building was half empty when I moved in there with my 3-year-old. We got to know the neighbors pretty quickly. I met a woman named Rebecca. She told me that her previous boyfriend died from heart complications not too long ago. Then she told me how his friend Jim was there for her and how they leaned on each other during their time of mourning. She said that she moved out of her place to live with Jim in his basement suite. She wasn't much older than I was, pretty with dark curly hair and pale skin. I nodded my head and commiserated with her. It was good that we had each other, to be honest. Grief was hard enough on our own, and if you can find a shoulder to lean on, then it was that much lighter. They offered me a beer, but I declined, and that was Rebecca. Now, one day, I was curled up on my couch watching TV alone one night. It was well after midnight when somebody knocked on my door. My immediate thought was, who the heck would be knocking on my door at this hour? My nosy self headed over to look into the peephole, and standing there in the hallway, under the fluorescent light, was this older gentleman. He was wearing a short-sleeved colourful print shirt, khaki shorts, and brown sandals. He was a white guy with silver, messy, medium-length hair, and he had a bit of a paunch. I opened the door. He looked at me with these sad blue eyes, and he asked, "Is Rebecca home?" I furrowed my brow and then told him that she didn't live in this unit anymore. I told him that she moved into Unit 3 downstairs. The expression on his face after I said that, it was a mix of surprise, disappointment, and something else too. He quickly looked at his feet. I went to close the door, but he looked up at me and then he said that he was thirsty. He asked me if I could please give him a glass of water. I was a bit taken aback by that because that was a bit of a strange request. Ever the helpful person though, I said, "Sure, but stay here." I shut the door, locked it, and then headed to the kitchen. I ran the cold tap water into a mug. Then I unlocked the door. I opened it and I was handing him the water, and I got this strong gut feeling to just not touch his skin. I carefully avoided his fingers. He took a few sips and then he handed the mug back. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt alarmed, in danger almost. I didn't let his hand touch mine, and then I closed the door quickly. My heart sped up a bit. The hallway was chilly and my fingertips felt cold. I peeked into the peephole and there was no one there. I was uncomfortable the rest of the night. Like, why did I tell him where Rebecca lived? I shouldn't have done that. I felt like I did something really wrong by doing this, and it was as if I had just given permission of some kind, or I had just allowed something to happen maybe. Honestly, I don't remember if these things happened before or after that night, but the lights would burn out, especially the dining room light. It was frequent enough that I asked management to check the electrical, and they said everything was good and there was nothing broken or loose in the wiring. I ended up just leaving the dining room dark in the end. My boyfriend was over one evening and the three of us were watching TV together in the living room. My boyfriend got up to make himself a sandwich. There was an old wooden sort of room divider between the two rooms, and we could see him at the counter fixing his snack. We had our own on the coffee table. My boyfriend had to walk around the divider through the dark, dingy room area to get into the kitchen. My 3-year-old said, "Mummy, why is that man staring at us?" I asked, "What man? Where is he?" My 3-year-old pointed to the dark dining room area, and I looked, but of course there was no one there. I was really creeped out, but I asked, "What does he look like?" "He has big fat eyes and his hair is like this." Then my child showed me with their little hands how the man's hair stuck out, then made wavy fingers. I didn't want to scare my baby, so I pretended what they had said didn't frighten me. My boyfriend, on the other hand, was still in the kitchen, and he paused mid-slice after he had heard that. Then my 3-year-old said, "He is your friend who shuts off the lights." At that, I shuddered. I wrapped my child up in the blankets and my boyfriend came over to join us. I stayed up that whole night, just watching over them. So I have a few stories to tell, and I'm kinda hoping that someone can debunk them, to be honest. Let's start off with the earliest story in my arsenal. So my grandfather, when he was in his 30s, circa 1940s outback Australia, he was a roo shooter, a kangaroo hunter at that time, and was out in the middle of nowhere when his truck broke down. Now, when you're shooting ruse, you do this at nighttime, and he said that he saw a light off in the distance and followed it thinking that it was a house light. He did seem to think that it was strange as he was walking for a while and didn't seem to be getting any closer. Dawn was approaching, so he went back to his truck and he waited. No one came looking for him. The following night, he said that it was very dark and it was about 10 p.m. and the light appeared again. This time it was a floating ball, is how he described it, about 1 kilometer away. He followed it and the same thing happened. As he approached, it appeared to be keeping the same distance away, yet when he retreated, it followed. My granddad was pretty fearless because if that were me, I would have run off and cried, to be honest. But thankfully, he was found the next day. The second story was my father's, and he also was out ruse shooting in his late teens, 1960s, with a friend. As they were driving off the property, they saw a really big kangaroo off to the side of the dirt road, single-car tracks. His friend stopped and took aim, but then behind them, another car pulled up. Dad told his friend that he should probably start driving as there was a car waiting. His friend said that it would only take a minute and then they could move the truck off the road to let them pass. As soon as he took the shot, the lights behind them suddenly disappeared though. They got out and looked where the car was and there was no car there and also no other tracks. They even drove back a few kilometers looking for them, but there was nothing. Then, about a month later, he was driving to his parents' home about maybe an hour away from where he was living at that time. He was with his friend and his friend's girlfriend, and they took the back roads. This was at about 7 p.m., and in the distance, they saw a weird glowing UFO hovering about 30 meters over a river. Out of curiosity, they went closer, and he said that they got about 50 meters away from it. He said that it was pulsating, sort of like exploding out light and then sucking it all back in. Now, Dad's pretty fearless also, and he wanted to get out and go and explore. His friends, however, they weren't so keen, and so they noped right out of there at that point. He still wonders about it to this day, though. I found Dad's journal from his teen years, and I even read those stories, so I think that what he's telling me is the truth. But now, for the most recent one. So in my parents' home in outback Queensland, it's pretty common for everyone to see the silhouette of my grandmother getting around. I was playing hide and seek with my friend one night, and I could hear her saying that she had found me, and to stop ignoring her and help her find my brother. Obviously, it wasn't me though. She said that this person was standing in front of the mirror in my room looking at herself, and it took her a bit to realize that it wasn't actually me. I was a pretty good hider at that time, and another time in the room on the front veranda, my brother, 16 at the time, said that he woke up to being pulled up by his arms. He got to the point where his butt was being lifted off when he felt whatever it was let go, and he instantly fell back to bed. He decided to just go back to sleep. He couldn't really care less, and I didn't believe him really until I was asleep on the couch in that same room. I was 4 months pregnant at the time with my second, and it was the only place that I could sleep comfortably. And I woke up to my arm being lifted off and up towards the roof. My arm fell back, and I decided that in the morning that I'd move back to the bedroom, but I was too tired to really care right then. Obviously, there are more stories, but I'll have to share them another day because there's a lot more. If anyone can explain anything about what I just shared though, then please do, because when I rethink of these stories, I tend to be a little bit afraid to go outside at night, and I just really don't like that. I recently got a job at Walmart in online grocery, and while I don't talk to customers nearly as much as cashiers or customer service, I do have to answer a lot of questions, and also direct people to items that they cannot find. There are plenty of stupid people who don't look before asking me where something is, and people who are just plain rude as well, but besides this one encounter, I haven't really had a problem, so to speak, with creepy men. At my past jobs, I was used to men making horrible comments about my body and body mods, but I guess at Walmart there's always someone weirder walking around, so I don't get as many now. It started at around noon when I went out on my first pick run of the day. I was in the soda aisle, struggling to fit a box pack of beer into my cart, when this guy came up and he helped me. He was probably in his, early to mid-20s. This kind of adds to the creep factor because I only recently turned 18 and haven't switched out of my yellow name tag yet. But he was a bigger guy, a bit shorter than me, wearing a corn shirt. I thanked him for helping me and said I liked his shirt. He said that it was no problem and complimented my hair. No big deal, right? I pick up my handheld and get back to bagging soda and praying that I don't get sent any exceptions that night. Around 15 minutes later, I'm in the soup aisle, crouched on the floor bagging 20 cans of Dinty Moore. Not my finest moment, I'll admit, but someone walks up behind me and says, "Excuse me." I'm already excited to talk to them. Nobody, and I mean nobody, says "excuse me" when they want my attention. So I stand up and turn around to see the same guy. He says that he's been looking everywhere and he cannot find the baking soda, and that he knows that he's probably passed it, but he wants to make sure that he's looking in the right area. The baking aisle is just a few over, and what a coincidence. The next thing that I need for my run is bread flour. So I tell him that I'm heading over to the aisle the baking soda is in right now, and I'll show him where it is when we get there. He says thank you. I finish scanning the Dinty Moore and we head over. It was a Tuesday and completely dead at this stage, like I was seeing my co-workers more often than customers. But we get to the baking aisle and I show him the baking soda, before getting to picking out the bread flour. I had a lot to pick from in that aisle, so I was there for a good 10 minutes just picking different items, and I couldn't help but notice that he put a tiny box of Arm & Hammer into his cart and was just sort of standing there on his phone, occasionally sort of looking at me. It was a little strange, but maybe he's texting someone and is feeling a bit awkward that neither of us have left the aisle yet. Who knows? In any case, I finish my pick run, stage the totes into the cart, and bring it to the back. I go on 2 more runs before my first 15-minute break, and I catch a glimpse of Corn Guy every so often. I figure he's having a hard time finding stuff because the Walmart that I work at is absolutely massive, and continue on with my day. I go into the break room to eat the salad that I had in the fridge and drink a cherry Pepsi while getting that good gossip from one of the guys from customer service. Life is good. For a second, I thought that I saw Corn Guy walk past the door though, but I figured that it was just an employee wearing the same shirt perhaps, and didn't think too much of it again until later. My manager tells me to do 3 more pick runs before I go to the back to start dispensing orders, and so I head out on a produce run. This is easily one of the worst types, as the produce section is super confusing and always crazy busy. In any case, I get to the produce section and start doing my thing when I see Corn Guy standing next to the corn stand. I sort of laugh to myself for a second before realizing that it's 1:30 at this point, and this guy has been at the Walmart for at least an hour and a half now. There are only 3 things in his cart too. I try not to look in his direction so he doesn't try to talk to me again and get back to bagging onions and weighing apples. At this point, I'm getting some serious weirdo vibes from this guy, but he walks up to me and says hi. I say hi back and I ask him if he needs anything. And he proceeds to go on the creepiest tirade that, honestly, I think I've ever heard. I remember almost exactly what he said because I was standing there in absolute horror the entire time while holding a bag of apples. What he said was, "I just wanted you to know that you don't need to eat salad if you don't want to. You don't need to lose weight. If you're trying to impress that guy that you were talking to, you should go for someone who would love you for who you are, not someone who would want to change you like that. You're so beautiful." I stare at this man in shock. For one, I eat my salads for lunch because I feel like salad, and it sure ain't a healthy salad either. Those things are loaded with Caesar dressing and bacon bits, you name it. Second of all, I have a boyfriend already. It's not Gavin from customer service, and he's also fat and could not care less what I eat. Third of all, I take offense that some random creep thinks that I, a grown woman, have been waiting all my life to be validated by him, a man who spends all day at Walmart without even being paid for it. Needless to say, I'm horrified, embarrassed because he just said this in front of multiple other customers who are giving us weird looks, and sort of ticked off by the audacity of this weirdo. Obviously, I cannot tell him any of this, at the risk of losing my job, but I stick with telling him that I think that that's inappropriate for him to say. He needs to stay out of employee-only areas like the break room, and if he needs anything else, he can go ahead and talk to customer service. He looks shocked, as if this wasn't the nicest way that I could have ended the conversation, and I end my pick run early to go talk to a manager. In the back, I tell my manager about Corn Guy, how he's been following me, and how I'm not going back out to pick tonight unless we know for sure that he's gone. She's understanding and lets me start dispensing early, and sends one of the guys in the back to pick in my place. The rest of the day goes, well, pretty okay really, except when my coworker and I go out together to take a huge order to one of the spots at the main parking lot, and the Corn Guy is sitting there on the bench out front. I prayed that he was waiting for someone to come and pick him up and refused to take out any more orders to the main lot. I managed to put away returns without seeing him, and with minimal trouble as well. And at 8, I go back to OGP, turn in my handheld and keycard, and say goodbye to everyone left. Now, I always park in the main lot right in front of the grocery section, and as I'm walking, it's just starting to get a little bit dark. It had been raining on and off the whole day, and it was the perfect balance of summer warmth and cold rain outside. As I'm unlocking my terrible old CRV, I see the Corn Guy approaching me. I'm genuinely a little bit scared of what he wants from me at this stage, but at this point I have my keys out, and the pepper spray on the chain is clearly visible, so I'm hoping that he isn't stupid enough to try anything. He walks up to me and starts trying to talk again. I shut him down, telling him that he has been following me all day, a reminder that he has been at Walmart for a full 8 hours at this point, and I am pretty uncomfortable talking to him. I'm off the clock now, and if he needs something regarding Walmart, he can go talk to customer service, and if he wants to talk to me personally, I'm not interested, and he needs to leave me alone. He then has the nerve to look offended, and then he says something that really tops his salad rant in terms of stupid stuff to say to random women. Okay, since you're going to be like that, I won't ask you out. You're ungrateful. I thought you were cool and could maybe understand me, but you're just like every other girl. I'm too morbidly curious, so I ask him what the heck that means. He says, I mean, you seem cool. I don't see anyone around here with ears stretched that big or who can appreciate Corn's artistry. I thought that maybe you were on my level, but you're just like every other stupid Midwesterner in this terrible town. At the end of this little rant, he then digs into his pocket of his sweatpants and produces a little switchblade. This pitiful little thing couldn't skin a hamster, but still, it was a blade. To be honest, I'm somehow even more offended, I guess. I mean, first, I've been stalked all day because I have stretched ears, and complimented a guy's band shirt. Second, he thinks Korn is some deep-cut metal band that nobody else has ever heard of. Third of all, we live in Iowa, but We live in one of the largest cities in Iowa, and this Walmart is right in the middle of it. And fourth, he's not only threatening me with a knife for not living up to his manic pixie dream girl fantasy, but thinks I'm going to be scared of that pathetic excuse of a knife. At this point, I'm so sick of this guy that I just get in my car, tell him to go and take a hike, slam the door, and I get out of there. Thankfully, I haven't seen him since, but I work pretty much every day, so my guess is that it's probably only a matter of time. I have been a little bit on the lookout, but I try not to let it get to me. Still, if he was willing to bring a blade like that and threaten me, then who knows what this guy is capable of. If you've listened to my other stories that I've shared here recently, then you know that I mentioned about growing up in the woods in a secluded area, and that the house and the property that we live on was a hotbed for paranormal activity and strange occurrences. I honestly believe that the land was cursed by Native Americans hundreds of years ago. Anyway, we always had a ton of pets and even had a small personal farm with all sorts of animals. For some reason though, we had terrible luck keeping anything alive. Our pets would die in the strangest of accidents and gruesome ways too. Nothing would ever live long, and we just constantly dealt with death. So obviously, with so many deaths, we began to grow quite a large pet cemetery in our backyard. What was strange and unexplainable though was what happened after we buried them. So I remember going to visit the grave of a recently buried pet and noticing that it was dug up and its head was missing. This happened every time too, and we genuinely all thought that it was a fox or some sort of other wild animal. This would go on for years and left us completely confused and honestly quite creeped out too. One day though, our dog, who was very old at this point and on his way out, he was put down at the vet's and we brought him home to bury him. We wrapped him in a white blanket and had to dig a very big hole because he was a huge dog, about 6 feet in length and also weighed a lot too. But 2 days later, after we buried him, my sister and I made our way back to visit our dog's grave, and as we approached, I noticed that something was off. You see, there was a pile of dug up dirt and there was some white sheet exposed from the ground. Something had dug up our dog, and it dug where the head was located and took it from the body while leaving the body still buried and untouched. This immediately scared me half to death because I now knew that this was not a fox or some other wild animal, because there was nothing to be able to take that head considering the size of my dog's head. It's just completely not possible. This now left us all creeped out and wondering what could possibly be doing this, and why it was doing this too. Also, I should probably mention too, because the horrible luck that we had with the animals, we really began to think that there was something wrong with us, and couldn't understand how this constantly happens, and what we were doing wrong. Well, after finally moving from there years and years later, we had, well, 0 issues, and we had no pets dying, and managed to have them to all live out to old age. And so we realized that it was not us, but something seriously wrong with that property that was impacting the animals. Might I mention too that it wasn't just animals either. Unfortunately, my baby brother also died on that property too. Another incident happened in the middle of the night when a priest was driving down the highway when he suddenly struck the telephone pole next to our mailbox, and his car drove up the pole, shooting it up into the air, which he was then ejected out of the windshield and died in our front yard. I remember finding his Bible the next day in the grass, which was, well, kind of creepy, I guess. We also almost didn't make it either when one cold January night, while my dad was away in another state working, my siblings and I, along with my mum, all huddled up in the living room near the wood-burning stove, keeping warm while we camped out with our pillows and blankets watching a movie. I, who was sleeping, suddenly awoke from my sleep and said calmly, "The house is on fire." This startled my mum, which prompted her to investigate, and It was in fact on fire. We all managed to run out with just the clothes on our back, but the house, which was 300 years old and made out of cedar, went up like a match and literally burned to the ground, leaving not even a beam behind. If I had not awoken up to say what I did at that point in time, well, we would have most likely been killed from the fire, especially with just how quickly it all lit up. This land has a history of tragedy, and even in current day it continues to harvest more negative energy by destroying everything that steps foot onto it, causing more torment and more pain. It's been 19 years since I moved away, and I still to this day constantly dream of the property, multiple times a month in fact, and my siblings and mother do as well, and quite honestly, it's like we cannot escape it. When I was 14 to 15, I was living with my dad. We lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment that was upstairs. I wouldn't say that the apartment was a hotspot for paranormal activity per se, but shortly after we moved in, some strange things definitely started to happen. For some reason, my dad's room always gave me the creeps. Mind you, I'm not really someone who is scared of the dark at all. But whenever I'd walk by his room and he wasn't home and the door was open, it felt like someone was looking back at me through that darkness. I started to close his door when he wasn't home because the feeling of being watched from his room was just overwhelming. One day I had walked home from school and I didn't see my dad's Jeep in the parking lot, so I figured that he was going to do some handiwork for someone or whatever. So I went inside and put down my backpack and walked straight to his room and shut the door. I settled down into my room when I heard heavy stomping sounds from my dad's room. My heart instantly stopped. My dad always wears these big steel-toe boots that are good for outdoor work or construction and carpentry, and it sounded exactly like his heavy steps. I stopped for a moment to listen and walked close to his door. When I realized that the light was on from the crack at the bottom of the door, I said, "Dad?" just to make sure my dad wasn't actually home. I know that I didn't see his car outside though, and so I didn't see my dad taking a nap when I first went to close the door either. And plus that light was not on, and I don't know, maybe I was just losing my mind. But whatever the case, there was no reply. I kept hearing the heavy footsteps though. My second thought was that, did someone break in and hide in my dad's room? Instantly at that thought, I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a knife as I kept hearing the sound of heavy boots walking around. I slowly walked back to his door and braced myself for a long minute before finally jolting the door open. But when I did, there was nothing. No one was in there. I quickly ran to his closet and slid the door open, knife in hand, but again, no one. At this point, I'm thinking that I'm going crazy, so I brush it off and I go about my day. But I would hear the footsteps from time to time, and then one weekend night, while my dad was working his 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. graveyard shift as a security officer, I was watching TV in the living room when I heard the doorknob jiggling on the front door. My eyes darted to the door as I froze, watching the doorknob jiggle for about a minute long before stopping. After it stopped, I got up to check the peephole, and again, there was no one. Needless to say, I got into the habit of sleeping with the lights on and a weapon close by after this. When my dad returned home in the morning, he says, "I think someone tried to break in, you know." I said, "What do you mean?" He signals for me to come to the outside of the door, and I see scratch marks and wood chipped away between the door and the frame around the knob. We chalked it up to maybe some junkie just trying to break in or something. We lived in an area that is notorious for drug use and poverty, but it definitely freaked us out. And my dad was always anxious to leave me alone after that. He also started texting more and calling during his night shifts to check in on me as well. As I wasn't sleeping much at the time, obviously, One school night, while he was away working, everything was pretty calm to begin. No footsteps, no doorknobs jiggling, no ominous feeling in the apartment at all. I had texted my dad that everything was good and I was going to go to sleep. I had to get up early for school the next day as well. But I got up at around 6:30 in the morning and I got up to use the restroom. I was particularly tired this day and I didn't want to get into the shower yet, so I went to lay back down and scroll on my phone for a bit. As I'm laying in bed, I hear the front door unlock. Now, my dad usually gets off at about 8 a.m., but I assume maybe he got out early as he did from time to time. "Dad?" I call out. No reply. But I heard a sort of grunting sound. It sounded like my dad was hurt maybe, like the sound you make when your lips are closed and you groan in pain if you stub your toe. But it was a deep groan. Working security at a casino and a bar, my dad often would get into altercations with drunk patrons, and when he had to remove them, sometimes it could get pretty physical. He'd been injured at work many times like this, so I said, "Dad, are you okay?" But there was no reply. The groaning became louder and I heard a sort of dragging sound on the carpet simultaneously. I'm thinking that maybe he hurt his foot or his leg. The dragging and the groaning noise trailed from the living room to the kitchen and onto the tile floor. And then I heard the fridge open and then close. I called out one more time, "Dad," but there was no reply. Now I'm freaked out and sinking deep into my bed as my heart pounds. I heard the dragging noise on the carpet again, and the groaning noise started getting closer to my room. And then the groaning turned into a growling noise, like a dog or maybe a wolf. And quickly the growling was a snarling, evil sound that I cannot get out of my mind. I pulled the blankets over my head and started to cry and pray. I was shaking. The growling approached the doorway to my room. It was in my room now and really loud. I could hear the anger and the threat seemingly directed toward me. And then I heard the sound of a gust of wind. My light bulb suddenly blew out and the lights went off. It became dark and cold suddenly. My fight or flight kicked in at this point and I jumped out of bed to face whatever it was, but I couldn't see anything. Except, strangely, a gallon of water from our fridge was now in the middle of the floor that was not there when I had gone to the bathroom minutes before. At this point, I'm too freaked out to pay that any mind, and so I run out of my room to the front door and see nobody in the living room. And weirdly, the front door is locked. I quickly unlock the door and run down the stairs crying. I immediately called my dad, who left work and rushed home. I waited at the bottom of the steps until he arrived. He thinks that I just had a bad dream to this day, but we moved out soon after because I just couldn't stand being there anymore. Whatever it was, it didn't seem like a trapped spirit or anything. I never had any other experiences like this anywhere that I've lived, before or since then. And it's my only true paranormal experience that I've ever had. To this day, I swear that it was a demon in that apartment that was mimicking my dad. But why that place, I have no idea. Why did it mimic my dad? I don't know. Whatever the case, I'm just really glad that it didn't follow me when we moved. But I will never, ever forget the sound of whatever it was growling at me. So I've never had any paranormal experiences before, but I'm a bit of a lurker here, so I thought that I would share this. So last night I woke up at 2:59 to go to the toilet. I checked the clock when I came back and it was 3 a.m. sharp. I was lying in my bed on my back and I fell asleep. But then I felt as if something was lifting me up from my backside, as if something in the mattress was pushing me up, and then I was in sort of a total sleep paralysis mode. My teeth were clapped really hard and I couldn't open my eyes or move or anything. I then remembered some stories from here, and in my head I started shouting, "I believe in God and Jesus Christ, and you have no power in my house. Get out and leave us alone." My husband was in bed, sound asleep. We also have a dog that was sleeping in the living room. I then managed to open my eyes slightly to see a shadow standing beside the bed on my side, looking down and floating. It had no face or features, but I could tell that it was sort of looking down based on the angle of where the head was. I kept repeating the same thing in my head, and it started to float towards the door, passing over the bed. It didn't really have a distinct body shape, just a sort of black cloud with a head, and suddenly looked backwards towards me, and for eyes it seemed to have like white dots that were looking at me. Whatever it was, it terrified me, and it felt evil. It left the room and my paralysis suddenly ended. The dog then rushed to our room and slept there till morning, which was a bit odd. Mind you, I kept having nightmares afterwards and kept hearing a male voice saying something as if he was calling my name in a voice similar to my husband, but not quite. And when I told my husband, he said that he had had nightmares all night as well, and felt no movement on the bed. I burned sage and prayed, but I don't know what that was, and I really don't know what to do about any of this. I would pretty much rather not see it again, as it scared the heck out of me. So if you have any insights on what this was or what I could do to get rid of it permanently, then please do share. We live in the inner city of Melbourne, Australia, in an apartment building relatively new, so I don't know if the place is haunted or what that was, but I sure hope that it doesn't come back. This happened in 2022. 2 months in, I had bought my first house, and it was an old farm far from any neighbours, except an old lady, joint ownership, in the centre of France. I was living alone, 28 years old, and I was fairly unlucky because I broke my right hand the first day that I went there. Then my horse broke my nose accidentally 1 month after as well. This was during the summer, and there was a storm that night, a thunderstorm in fact. I was sleeping in my room, almost naked because of the heat, in the converted attic of the house. At 11:30 p.m, I woke up because I had heard a sound coming from the second room. It was the room adjacent to mine, so only a wall between it. It sounded like someone was standing behind the wall, in fact, between both rooms. I heard floor noise. It was different from any wind and beams which are creaking all the time. Not persuaded by that at all, though, that someone could be there in that place. I was too lazy, but I had to ensure that no one was actually in the house, well, in case of a break-in or whatever. But before I get to this, I should probably explain that the second room has an access to the attic. It's accessible by a stair with an old door leading directly to the outside. And it was in this attic, the undeveloped part, that there was a kind of mezzanine there. When I went into the room, still naked mind you, with my fractures, I didn't find anyone there, but the door between the rooms was open. I went to the top of the mezzanine when I saw a shadow take refuge under the mezzanine out of my sight. It was at that moment that I realized that I wasn't alone in my house, and even if I wasn't sure about what I had seen, I went back quickly into my room, which had unfortunately no way of locking it. I sat myself against the only window in the room, and then I called my ex-boyfriend, who was a policeman. He lived about 10 minutes from home. I stayed there to be able to escape through that window if need be, if the intruder came by to my room. I really didn't know what to do at this point. I didn't want to hang around to find out, though. It was probably the best position that I could have been in at that time, but in any case, I practiced self-defense or martial arts a few years back, and if I had to fight, then I guess it was better than nothing. Fortunately, though, no one came into my room in that time, and my ex finally got there. Once he arrived, we went around the house together to find the intruder, but there wasn't anyone there. For a second, I believed that maybe I had just hallucinated everything, But then we heard the little girl of my ex screaming from outside. She was 6 years old, and my ex came with her because he was living in a too dangerous place to leave her alone, at his home that is. So he decided to bring her with him, telling her that they were coming here to fix some plumbing troubles or something, in order not to worry her, obviously. He left her in the car, and it was locked, obviously, but when we heard her, we rushed out to see what was going on. She was alone in the car, and she was crying. When we asked her why she was screaming, she told us that she saw a guy coming out of the house, but the old door, overlooking the attic where I was. Then he approached the car quickly, shook the door handle, and this was all according to her words. Thankfully, he didn't get in because the car was locked and he ran off, but I really still don't know who that guy was, what his intentions were, why he was standing in the place next to my room while I was sleeping, why he tried to take the car with the daughter of my ex inside of it instead of just escaping. And I just cannot help but think that whoever he was, that he had very evil intentions. Since then, the old lady living close to me has told me that someone knocked at her door during the night, and that it happened a few times. Apparently, though, when she went to check, there was never anyone there. So my boyfriend just told me that this happened, and he said that it happened within the last week. Our house is haunted, but this is really freaking me out. So I usually sleep on my left side and facing away from him in the bed, and on one night in particular, I had fallen asleep facing him while he was awake on his phone. He sat up for a moment and looked at me before realizing my eyes were wide open and I was trying to mouth something to him. He kept asking what and huh, but I just wasn't responding. He shined his phone screen on my face and my eyes were closed. My mouth was slightly open, but when he moved his screen light, he saw my eyes open and I was mouthing stuff to him again. He got so creeped out by this that he almost slept on the couch, but decided to just face away from me and fell back to sleep. This whole thing, though, it has me rattled. The stuff in our house doesn't usually freak me out, but this one has me shaken up a bit. His vision is good even in the dark, and I sleep with my eyes open sometimes, and it's creepy, but it's not wide open, and it doesn't stop once the light is on or anything. I don't know what this could have been if it wasn't his eyes playing tricks on him, and really I'm just not convinced that it was. This happened in Connecticut, United States in the year 2008. I actually saw this thing twice. The first time that I saw it, it was at night. For context though, when I was little I used to always stare out the window at night that faced a wooded grove that was about maybe 100 yards or so away from the house, and fall asleep staring at the window due to how peaceful the night was in the woods. So one night, when I was about maybe 8 to 9 years old, I'm staring out the window when suddenly I noticed 2 yellow lights in the woods. At first I was confused, thinking that a car was somehow in a tree. But as I stared more, the yellow lights disappeared and then reappeared in the same spot, almost like blinking eyes. As my groggy brain took a closer look at the lights, I started noticing other odd things, like how the tree these lights were showing up in was a little thicker than I remember, and how there was a giant wolf head in the trees, and that the yellow lights aligned with the head to be its eyes, it seemed. This is when I was getting nervous, and I bumped my head on the window accidentally as I was backing away. Well, as soon as my head hit the window, the wolf head turned suddenly towards my window, and the rest of the creature's body started emerging from behind this tree. The body was hard to see at first because it was jet black and perfectly blended into the shadows, but now that it was stepping out into the moonlight, and I was freaking out because this wolf was actually on 2 legs, and the top of this wolf's head was a good 10 feet off the ground at least. The wolf stayed in the tree line, but was still very much visible from my window, and I could tell that it knew exactly where I was, even though there were no lights on outside for it to even see me with. By this point, I had seen more than enough, so I quickly slammed the curtain shut and hid under my covers that whole night, waiting to hear it clawing at the window to get me. Fortunately, this didn't happen, and I stayed buried under the covers until my alarm clock went off the next morning. I never told anyone about it because, although I saw it myself, I just still couldn't believe that it had actually happened. The second encounter happened 12 years later, during a 4th of July celebration actually. So me and my dad were setting off fireworks in the backyard to celebrate, and when we were done with the fireworks show, as my dad and I were packing up for the night, I saw the same pitch-black wolf head peeking out from behind the shed with the same glowing yellow eyes. The head was absolutely massive. It was every bit the size of a 3-foot wide window on that side of the house, in fact. When it saw me staring at it, it quickly ducked its head back behind the shed. I told my dad that there was a big dog back there, and he just chalked it up to coyotes. Well, if that was a coyote, then how did it manage to stand on 2 feet, and how did its face take up the entirety of a 3-foot window? To this day, I really don't know for sure what I saw, but it matches the description that has been given for dogmen by other supposed witnesses, so until I see otherwise, I'm gonna say that what I saw was a dogman. It was terrifying to see both times, and I never again want to see it or anything like it. A few nights ago, I went to see the Wicked movie with my family who was in town for Thanksgiving. I arrived back to my house at around midnight. I live alone in a shared but divided house with 2 other tenants living inside of it. One is upstairs and one splits the downstairs with me, so there's 3 apartments total. My place is in the back of the house and has a back porch you can enter through after walking up the whole driveway. So when I got home, I sat in my bedroom and did about 20 to 30 minutes of work on my computer. During this time, the house was very quiet and I kept hearing a man's voice continuously talking. Now, keep in mind, the tenant above me is a man, and I know his bedroom is right above mine because I previously lived up there. It sounded like he was talking on the phone, maybe, just because of how long and continuous the talking went on for. I tried to listen and figure out where the voice was coming from, and I just couldn't exactly pinpoint it. But it was either coming from through the ceiling or on the other side of my room, maybe. Now, it must be noted that my bedroom, it connects to the porch with a door that I have blocked with my dresser. There's a main door inside the porch that you use to get into the house, but there's also this strange door connecting to my room. I couldn't make out the words, but because of how firm and continuous the voice was going on, I figured that it just had to be coming from my housemate upstairs. I mean, it's just the only thing that made any logical sense. I just kept on thinking, though, I had never heard a single voice come through the ceiling before like that. I mean, it's not that thin. Whatever, I'm worrying about nothing. After about 20 to 30 minutes of computer work, I got up to go and brush my teeth, feed my fish, get ready for bed, etc. I come back into my room, turn off the lights and get into bed. Keep in mind, it's been about 45 to 60 minutes since I first heard the voice, and I could still hear it. Damn, I thought. My housemate is chatting up a storm on the phone up there. But oh, how wrong I was. After about 3 minutes of laying in bed, I, all of a sudden, heard my porch door creaking along with the talking man's voice. It has a very distinct sound that I knew immediately was my porch door. I crept across my room and put my ear to the dresser or the door that connects to the porch. Sure enough, the talking was coming from inside my porch, and I could hear the door moving and shuffling inside my porch along with it. Well, at that, my heart absolutely sank. All the lights were off in my house at this point, so I had a sort of sneaky advantage to creep around my house and get a view of what was going on. I crept down my hallway and peered into the kitchen, which the porch leads into. Across the kitchen, through the door and in a streak of moonlight, I just see a man with long, scraggly hair sitting curled up in the center of my porch, turned around with his back to me, muttering out loud to himself and rocking back and forth. My fight or flight kicked in at this stage, and I immediately ripped open the door and started screaming at him to get out, trying to intimidate him. Looking back, I probably shouldn't have made myself so vulnerable, at least without a weapon handy, but like I said, I was just in fight or flight. I can't explain my actions in this moment, other than reacting out of fear and determination to scare him out. Anyways, this dude didn't even react to me whipping open the door and screaming at him, not even a flinch. He simply turned his head to the side, very slowly might I add, and said, "My name is Evan." This freaked me out so much for some reason, especially because he still hadn't turned around or shown his face. I said that I don't care and kept cursing at him to leave, and he slowly rose up with his hands up and said, I know, I'm hiding." He wasn't saying it in like a pleading way though. He said it with an almost childlike or playful tone that freaked me out heaps. I hated this. The fact that he kept trying to reason with me as well and act so mysterious while not even trying to turn around to show his face just really ticked me off, honestly. I mean, who does this guy think he is? Eventually, I ran him out of the porch and was just threatening him the whole time. Now, I assume that it was just a homeless man who was under the influence of something, as I do live in an inner city area and it's common to see homeless people near my street, but I don't know, man. The sight of seeing him on my porch and knowing that he was in there for at least an hour beforehand, while I was sitting right there, just really freaked me out. I was in full-blown defense mode by the time that I'd opened that door, and I wasn't willing to waste any time to do a character dive on the guy. No imaginable situation would permit anyone to be on my porch like that at an hour like that. Needless to say, I'll be double-checking my porch lock every night from now on. It's funny though, because having my room connected to the porch like this, I always had this horrific intrusive thought that I'd hear someone in there one night. And, well, it looks like it actually came true. This happened a while ago when I was 14 years old, but I've been thinking about it lately. My parents had just split up and we had moved into a new house, so it was just me, my mum, and my brother. My mum worked shifts, so I would often walk home from school and be home alone for a few hours. My brother is older than me, so he would have been working too. One night I got home and decided to play on the trampoline because it was summer. I was bouncing when I noticed my mum come into the kitchen with her work bag on, so naturally I thought she was home early. I was excited to see her, so I quickly ran down the garden path, but for whatever reason I stopped at the very end of the path, just before the patio, and looked right at her through the glass back door and into the kitchen. I looked, and I just remember being, well, scared and thinking that that's not my mum. I ran back up the garden path and sat on the trampoline and waited until somebody came home. I waited so long I actually fell asleep in the sun until my mum actually did come home and she woke me up. Since then, I have had some other experiences, such as hearing my mum call my name, or being at my bedroom door but I open it and she's downstairs or out of the house or whatever. She's also said that sometimes she'll hear me sobbing in my room when I haven't been crying. My mum even asks me if I have been crying and if I'm okay. But what are people's take on this situation? I've never experienced anything like this again, but would something supernatural explain what I saw that day and what I did experience? You guys let me know. The following is a true account of my experience attempting an all-night hike on November 18th. I'm sharing it here because I assume that somebody somewhere may have the same experience, or knowledge at least, to explain away the events that I'm about to describe, and maybe provide some clarity regarding what animal I could have been encountering. So if anyone out there has an explanation for these events, then please do share, because what I'm about to tell you, I can assure you, is all real. 2 days ago, I went to a state park a while north of me to attempt an all-night hiking adventure that I thought would be fun and maybe a little bit scary as well. But only scary enough to make for a good story, you know. The most I was prepared for was fighting coyotes over my food, but that was really, really wrong in hindsight. Without boring you with all the details, I'll immediately begin describing what happened. So I got to East Fork State Park in Batavia around 7 p.m. Given the time of year, it was already dark, and I myself am very aware of the effects that aesthetics can have on the body, so I began picking a spot near the lake and cooking my food and all that. I placed a T-bone steak onto my propane grill and began to cook it. However, after turning around to rummage through my pack for a second flashlight, my hand stumbled across something cold and hard. I picked it up and, to my utter confusion, it was the steak that I could have sworn I prepared already. I looked down to see my propane grill running, but with nothing on it. In the woods where your senses are already off a bit, and events that otherwise wouldn't worry you are quite frightening in the woods actually. I was immediately put off by this occurrence, as I'm not on any medication, and nor do I have any mental illnesses or anything that should have caused this. In an attempt to regain my comfort, I guess you could say, I took the steak and once again placed it on the grill. I stared at it and watched it sizzle. I even waited to be able to smell the steam before I took my eye off it again. I then continued looking for my flashlight, and all was well for a few hours. By this time I had hiked maybe a mile, I would guess. I was moving quite slow compared to normal, and the steak thing was still on my mind, but not too worrying. I came around a bend where the trees began to get more dense and sat lower, when I saw a deer standing maybe 20 yards away, perfectly positioned facing me on the trail. I wasn't worried by this yet though, and actually reached for my phone to take a picture. I wanted to wait for the deer to turn its head, which I assumed it would, as deer eyes are placed on the sides of its head, but before taking the photo, that is. I stood there, making eye contact with this buck for a solid 45 seconds before I began to question things. Eventually, I gave up and I took the photo, and then began to approach the deer to get it to move so that I could continue the hike. As I got closer, however, the deer remained, well, completely unfazed. Baffled, I took my phone out once again and began recording. I approached the deer slowly and was able to get within about 10 feet of it before I heard it exhale and it just hopped off. I was extremely surprised by this behavior, but not yet scared. I continued hiking, and by this point I had stopped thinking about the steak event. For about another hour or so, I was granted a peaceful hike, until I reached an area where the path came to a bald spot in the trees. Looking around was cut short, as the absolutely pungent stench of burning hair and rotting flesh was the only thing that I could now detect. The smell was so incredibly present that I immediately began to vomit, in fact. This is nothing strange because I am typically very sensitive to smells, and my stomach is easily upset too. However, what was not normal was that I kept vomiting. I continued to vomit all over the ground, losing every single thing that I had eaten. I heaved probably about 5 times before then dry heaving another 3. By this point, I was laying on the ground in excruciating pain and even crying. My vision was clouded by tears, but between my forceful blinks, I could see my hands illuminated in a sort of soft red glow. And when I stopped heaving, I looked up and I saw a light over the trees, but with no source for it. Sort of as if someone was holding a really bright flashlight at you from meters away. I scrambled to my feet and placed my hand in vomit accidentally, which is important later, and began running. I had no idea what was going on, but I assumed that I was extremely ill. Between the hallucinations and the vomiting, I was convinced that I was poisoned or ate something that I shouldn't have at some point. I ripped out my flashlight and began walking. The way back was thankfully normal, and besides my horrible stomach ache, I was generally fine, really. However, upon crossing the base of the peninsula that I cooked on, I felt my flashlight get jerked out of my hand all of a sudden. I turned back, unbothered, thinking that the string had been caught on a stick, but I realized quickly that I was in an area of strictly sand, with no vertical or horizontal objects anywhere. Confused by that, I turned back to the direction that I was going and I continued. At this point, I was feeling that kind of fear that you feel as a child when you first wake up from a bad dream, where the back of my throat got that odd feeling. I made it up a rather steep hill eventually and looked back at the peninsula, and what I saw genuinely has my mind in shambles to this day. I saw myself turned around looking for my flashlight. Frozen with confusion and fear, I just sort of watched. The other me searched frantically and eventually fell to his hands and knees searching. I then heard something which I cannot express enough terror with words to convey the emotion that I was feeling, but I watched in the distance as I began to physically rip myself apart. I ripped off my own limbs and began to eat my own fingers. I once again began to vomit, and the stench of the burning hair once again returned. This time I was only puking bile and heaved twice before standing straight up again. Then, looking back at the peninsula, I saw nothing. The hallucination was gone, but that smell remained. I began running and found the trail again. I actually passed a camping shelter with 3 walls and a very slanted roof, which I didn't remember from the journey in before. But the short bridge afterwards solidified in my mind that I was on the right path. I began to run, guided only by spots of dim moonlight on the ground. I sprinted longer than I believe I ever have before, and eventually I made it to the exit, where I immediately threw my stuff into the passenger seat and quickly drove away. I still don't know how to explain what happened to me, and there are many feelings and details that I've left out to keep this as short as I can, but I've tried to create a meaningful degree of explanation here. I'm begging too that if anyone recognizes these as symptoms of an illness or a psychotic drug or something, then please do tell me. Also, if this is something else entirely, then again, please do tell me. I'm just begging for an explanation as to what this all is. I'm actually going to see a psychiatrist tomorrow and have already consulted my doctor about this. If I do have any major updates, I'll be sure to share them with you guys, but I would appreciate anyone's considerations. Please do try to provide me with an explanation of what the heck happened to me out on that hike. This happened quite a few years ago. Back then, I had an affinity for a particular white substance in the form of lines, and one very cold, snowy night, around 11 p.m., I went for a walk to meet my dealer. I had never been to his place before, so he gave me the address to this small 2-story apartment building with maybe 6 units in it. Upon arrival, I noticed several strangers inside. After they had hit their pipes, two clearly unwashed guys came over to sit at the dining table while I waited for my G. I've never smoked anything besides weed and cigarettes. I was instantly uncomfortable. They tried making small talk, but I grew increasingly uneasy, giving only short, vague answers. I quickly paid for my stuff, grabbed the baggie, and I got up from the table. That's when one of the guys offered to walk me home. My heart skipped a beat at that, and I politely declined. "Oh, I'm okay, thanks. I don't live far." The other guy stood up. "No, really, we can walk you. We don't mind. We have to get going anyway." That's when my instincts finally kicked in. I became very aware and very scared. I immediately thought, I'm fully dressed and ready to go, but they still have to put on their coats and shoes. If I leave now, I'll get a head start and quickly disappear before they can see me. They said something else as I headed for the door, but I pretended to take a phone call, waved goodbye to my dealer, and I closed the door behind me. I jogged down the hallway to the outside door, and once I got outside, I ran for the street. I decided not to take the faster route home because from the building they'd be able to see me. I didn't want them knowing even the slightest direction that I lived in, if they were really following me. The building was at the end of a street though, so instead of going straight up the hill, the way I initially came from, I turned right and started jogging instead. I kept glancing back, and finally I saw them, about a block behind, following me. The street that I needed, Stanley Street, it was across the intersection on my left, about another block ahead at a four-way light. As I approached the intersection, I noticed the corner house on my right. There was an older man sitting on his porch smoking, and I recognized him. He was another dealer that I had met only once a few weeks before when my usual guy was dry. I choked up as I got to his porch and asked if he remembered me. He did and asked what's wrong. I quietly told him I think these two guys are following me, and asked if I could go inside for a minute until they passed. He didn't hesitate either. We went inside, past his front living room and into the kitchen where I explained what happened. He told me not to worry, that I was safe there and I could stay as long as I needed to. Then we heard a knock at the door and I started to panic. He went to the door looking through the peephole and yelled, "Just a minute." He came back quickly and whispered that he knew the guys and was going to invite them in to have a hit. He told me to sneak out through his back door, which was beyond the kitchen, go to the right of the yard and find the gate. This would lead to a side street and I could find my way from there. He instructed me to creep up along the side of his house, close to the shrubs, and check the porch to make sure that they had gone inside. I followed his plan, and when the coast was clear, I didn't jog. I sprinted up Stanley Street and zigzagged all the way home. When I think back on this now, I'm honestly in disbelief at my actions and how foolish I actually was. I thought that I was invincible. I was far too trusting. But I truly thank God for the man who helped me that night, because without him, I shudder at the thought of what might have happened. I truly don't know what those two guys wanted from me, but I'm grateful that I really never had to find out. So my buddy in Alaska, he told me a story the other day. He said that he was walking with his buddy at around 2 to 3 a.m. past the Palmer Fairgrounds last winter, when his buddy grabbed him and pointed across the road from them and said, "Look at that." And over across the road from them was what at first looked to him like a moose, had a long snout, and his friend said that he saw antlers. When it stood up on its hind legs, he said that it was a couple of feet taller than him from what he could see, and he's at least 6 foot tall. When it stood up, he took off running, and his buddy yelled and started running after him. And as they were running, he said that it was running alongside of them on the other side of the road. He said that it sounded like a man running, bipedal in other words, woods, and its footsteps were extremely heavy sounding and sounded like heavy thuds as it was running alongside of them. After a couple of seconds of running, he said that his buddy whipped around and said, "To heck with this, let's fight it." And they started pumping each other up, and they picked up their skateboards to use as an attack on it. But when they turned to try and find it, there was nothing there and it had disappeared. They combed all over that area that they were in, but they never saw it again. When they got home, they both had the exact same story, and they both said that they saw the exact same thing. So, just curious as to what you guys might think this is. If there's anyone in this area or just in Alaska in general, and they have a similar story or experience, I would really love to hear it. I've never really experienced anything paranormal in my life until, well, just recently. To be honest, I wasn't fully sure that I believed in ghosts, but I like the stories, I guess. The other night, me and my best friend were having a sleepover at my house, and around 1:30 in the morning we decided to go down into my kitchen just to get some drinks. Now, I have a bathroom off my kitchen, so I decided to use it first thing. I walked in, closed the door behind me, and locked it. I live in an older house with not many renovations, so the lock in this door is one of those stupid ones that you have to push in until it clicks. I'm like 100% sure that I closed this door as well, but after halfway through me doing my business, the door suddenly flung open and the lock popped to be unlocked. I immediately tried to close it desperately because I was embarrassed, and when I tried to, it felt like someone was pushing on the door to open it. I opened it a little to see if it was my best friend, but no one was standing there. After that, it seemed to sort of let go, and I just closed it and continued on, weirded out, and quickening my pace to see what my best friend wanted, still telling myself that it was just him. When I walked out, he was halfway across the kitchen. I asked him if he opened the door on me, even though there wasn't a single chance that he did, and he obviously denied it. I just sort of shrugged it off and started pouring myself a drink. I then heard little light footsteps approaching me from behind, and I assumed it was my cat, but there was nothing there, and there was nobody there when I turned around. At this point, I'm not really scared, but just sort of confused, I guess. Me and my best friend wrapped up what we were doing, and we started heading upstairs. But in the end, me and my best friend just sort of wrapped up what we were doing, and we started heading up the stairs. From the top of my stairs, you can sort of still see into the entry of the kitchen, and I swear to you that I saw feet and legs standing there. I stared at it for a few seconds to make sure I just wasn't psyching myself out, or that it wasn't a shadow or something, but I know what it was. We quickly ran into the room and stayed up for a bit before we got my confidence to go to bed. That night, I had a terrible dream about this spirit in my kitchen, and it was extremely aggressive towards me. I woke up in a cold sweat, and I just couldn't sleep again. Around 2 p.m. the next day, my friend had left and my parents were at work, so I was alone. I was in the kitchen boiling some water on the stove when my electric kettle randomly turned on behind me, and I mean full speed boiling as if it had been boiling for minutes. I quickly turned around and I looked at it until I realized that it wasn't even plugged in. And I mean, there's no way that this kettle would work without being plugged in. I pushed the button to turn it off and then plugged it in to see what was going on, and now all of a sudden it won't work at all. I quickly went to my room and remained there until my parents got home after that, because it weirded me out with what happened the other night. Later that night, I was in my room and my TV turned on out of nowhere. I didn't sit on my remote or anything too. I mean, it was across the room entirely. Now it's 2 a.m. and an hour ago someone started aggressively banging on my bedroom door. My parents are asleep and snoring and the cat is on my bed. Nobody else is here, but the cat is freaking out, so I don't know. What should I do about this? I went to Colombia for a vacation. I have always liked South American countries, more than anything because my parents almost always went there to spend some short vacations. So you could say that I followed their tradition, I guess. I had already rented a house to stay there when I was away. It wasn't the best in the world, but it worked. Anyway, I slept in a small room with the television pointed directly in front of my bed, just as it should always be. And behind the television there was a window that I always opened when it was very hot. I closed it when I was going to sleep at about 12 at night. Now, I remember that night I was watching YouTube videos and other nonsense on the internet, just sort of killing time while waiting for my food to be ready. However, like the sound of an alarm, I started hearing a sound that I could only compare with the sound that a sort of didgeridoo makes. It immediately threw me off. I put my cell phone down and took a quick look at my room. I thought for a moment that it was just some random person who, for incomprehensible reasons, was playing an instrument in the street. But it only took me a moment to notice that there was a face that was shamelessly peeking out of my window. His face seemed to be sort of partially melted, something that was noticeable more by the shape of his head than by his skin. The latter, with a mud color, seemed to be worn out and almost in a state of decomposition. What I mean is that he had no nose and his eyes were completely circular and also black. His mouth seemed to have a small smile on the right side, but on the left side, it seemed to be broken almost, but perhaps unintentionally showing an extension of his mouth on that side, forming a smile up to his cheek. His mouth had nothing inside either. It was only black. The sound of the didgeridoo that I could hear only increased all the tension and fear that I had at that moment. But I stopped trying to understand what that thing was and suddenly began to think about my safety. I ran as quickly as possible to the kitchen and took out a knife, and I returned. I stared at it. I was pretty terrified, but that didn't prevent me from at least preparing for any attempted intrusion in my house of that creature. His face remained static, although the sound didn't stop. After maybe 4 or 5 minutes of looking at it and sweating, the creature finally moved its face, turned to the right, and then it left. And the sound it made also disappeared. I ran towards my door and I saw its shadow under my door. At that moment, the lights outside of my house were already on. I was almost paralyzed by the entire encounter. I've always believed in sightings of impossible things, but seeing or reading about them on the internet is something completely different from experiencing them in your own life. I knew that what I saw was not natural. The window, with all the fear running through my body, was closed by me minutes later. Obviously, I couldn't sleep after that, nor could I really concentrate on other things. I was just thinking, trying to give an explanation to what I had seen. And if he really was just a messed up tramp who wanted to spy. That theory, although disturbing, I preferred it. But it just wasn't possible, since the place behind the window has no way for someone to lean on it to look, because it's about 2 meters off the ground. In that park there were cracks on the ground too that had left an unfinished construction. So what I mean is that there was just no human way a normal person could look into that window from there. This is the first time that I've shared this publicly. I don't really like talking about it because I know it makes me seem a bit crazy, but I just felt like I had to share it. And who knows, maybe someone out there might know what this is. So one day, me, my parents, my sister, my uncle, my aunt, and my 2 cousins were out at the park or something. I don't remember what place exactly this was, but we were walking, talking, etc. until we got to a part where there was a rocky beach and I was following my older cousin while my younger cousin was behind me. We were jumping from rock to rock while talking. I don't even remember what we were talking about, and
As we neared the end of the rocky beach, I looked down to see where I was going to jump next, and when I looked back up, they were just not there anymore. What I mean is that they just vanished, both of them. So I yelled out their names, but nothing. There was no one there. Not my cousins, my parents, my sister, my uncle, or my aunt. I looked around, and after maybe 2 minutes, I left the rocky beach and tried looking for them. It looked like they were nowhere near me, though, and I didn't have my phone with me, so I couldn't call them. So there I was, lost and with no idea where the rest of the group was. Thank God that I remembered where the car was parked, so I walked all the way back to the car and waited almost an hour, and they came back. Everyone was apparently worried about me, and everyone was okay, but even my cousins were there, and I asked where they went. I told them what we were doing, and my cousins told me that they left the rocky beach way before reaching the end. So I was just there, dumbfounded, like, what the heck was that then? Who was I talking to? Why did they look and sound exactly like my cousins? Why did they suddenly disappear like that? Were they trying to separate me from the group? And if so, why? Does anyone have any idea what actually happened that day to me? When I was about 18 years old, I was living at my mother's house, which was 2 houses down from my grandmother's. One day I was biking to my grandmother's house, and I rode into the driveway, got off my bike, when I just felt something. Note that I'm pretty sensitive to things. When I sense something, I see a sort of image of what it is in my mind's eye. Anyways, I turned around and I saw a glimpse of a humanoid body with a deer head looking straight at me with my physical eyes. I then see someone who was also curious going over to it, where I saw it, that is, but they found nothing. I then went over and looked around the stone wall, but there were no signs of tracks or anything. I spoke to this person briefly and asked them, "Hey, did you see that?" And they were like, "Yeah, what was that?" So I know that I wasn't going crazy. But does anyone know what this could have been? I don't think it was a Wendigo or a skinwalker or anything, but I have heard that there's a Native American law of them being called not deer, or like the deer people or whatever, so I don't know. But if you have any thoughts on this, then please do share. This first encounter took place in the summer of, I believe, 2016 in Ontario, Canada. Although it was a while ago, I'll admit, I still remember every detail like it was yesterday. If I'd been alone, I would have chalked it up to just something else, but the fact that both of us saw this thing is what really puts me off. So, a friend and I were walking along a trail that runs alongside the main river that cuts through the city. There are some great wooded trails along the river, and some of them even lead to neighboring cities, but I digress. The sun was setting. It was at that time of the evening where it was insanely dark under the tree coverage, but still fairly light beyond the leaves. I turned on my phone flashlight to light the way and put on some music for the two of us to listen to while we hustled home. The bugs were starting to bite at this point, and being so close to the river, they were pretty nasty. I'd paused to change the song on my phone at some point, and my friend glances to our left into the woods. She asks me, "What's that?" And instinctively I turn the lights to where she was looking. In the darkness of the bushes and trees, we watch as this thing takes off running deeper into the brush with its back turned to us. It was making a ton of noise, twigs snapping, leaves rustling. It really didn't seem to care. Now, there are lots of deer on this trail, and I've seen a few on my walks during the day, but this was absolutely no deer. Even in such a short amount of time, the image of this thing running from us is burned into my mind. It was on all fours. It had a sort of awkward gait like a human trying to run on its hands and feet, meaning that its arms were far too short compared to its legs to be running like that. This thing was white and the light reflected off of its leathery-looking skin. It was skinny with thin arms and legs. The two of us didn't stick around much longer after that and instead chose to run the rest of the trail until we hit the end that led out into a set of soccer fields. Now, we never really spoke about it after that, and if we ever did, it was sort of just in passing. That was until yesterday. You see, I was scrolling through a subreddit for my city and paused the minute that I saw a title informing people to stay away from the river trails. Curious, I checked the post out, and the post, it described exactly what my friend and I had seen that night on those exact sets of trails by that river. I broke out into a cold sweat and immediately texted her, despite not even speaking for a while, as adulthood had kind of caught up to us both. She told me, though, that she still thinks about that encounter and does so at least once a week. I linked to the post, and she was floored by it. I won't be giving the link as it gives identifying details and, the internet and all that, but reading through the replies, it was what you would expect from Reddit, I guess. People chalking it up to the guy being mentally ill, joking about him doing drugs, and people who genuinely took him seriously were being downvoted and mocked. Someone mentioned that it was all bull and that the stories of these things had been going around in the area since 1972, meaning that this probably wasn't a one-off experience from the beginning. I'm always a little bit hesitant to share this story, out of fear that I'd get the same reception. I know what I saw that night, though, and knowing that it's possibly still in those woods along a set of trails that I still walk to this day, well, it is kind of unsettling to me. In the summer of 2022, my last camping trip with my family, we went to a popular camping location in Ohio. If you can figure it out, well, that's a bonus to you, but my sister and I, me 17 at the time, and her 14 at the time, shared a tent, so we stayed up giggling and messing around quite a bit, like or talking about boys that she liked. And mostly for week 1 in the 2-week trip, it was fine. We slept and talked like normal, until the second week where things took a bit of a turn. Now, I have a really hard time with sleeping, so when week 2 strolled around, my sister would be passed out asleep, and I would be sitting there, wide awake for hours at a time. While these hours where I sat awake just passed by, I heard noises, crunching, shifting, growling, howling even. The basic outdoor noises, though. For the next 2 days of week 2, I heard a lot of walking and talking in the woods, though. Things like "come here" or "help me." Sometimes I'd even hear faint whispering near my tent. Honestly, it began to scare me, and on the last 2 nights, which probably had been the worst, my sister was awake, both of us playing with her phone dead, and mine on a cool 20%. At around 2 a.m., my sister went to lay down, and so did I, until I heard thick footsteps around the tent. Much too heavy for deers or wolves, but way too light for bears or elk. Honestly, it was almost like a person was walking around my tent. My sister was awake and quietly watched as someone or something pressed on the tent sides and door. Now, my sister and I move all of the little tent zippers into our tents at night to keep people from trying to get in. Clearly, this person or thing was looking for said zippers as well. So, while we were scared, we felt pretty smart about it too. This was night 4 of week 2. Now, obviously we spoke about this and told people and all that, but they said that we probably were just hearing things. And on the final week 2, night 5, the same heavy footsteps, the same touching at the walls, and the same whispering to "come here" and "come out" were all around us. I was terrified and waited until 5 a.m. where I sat outside waiting for my grandma. While sitting out there, I then heard whispering and then screaming, the scariest, most blood-chilling scream that I'd ever heard. It sounded like some kind of a mixture of animal or person or something, but it was so loud that I nearly wet myself. I was glad that we left in the end, and even happier to not go back for 2 years. But my question for all of you is, does anyone know what this is? Or was it just some dude lurking on our campsite and trying to creep us out? Also, I talked to my grandparents about this, and they said Tater Tot, their little American shepherd at the time, had been snarling at something outside the tent walking around. Whatever it was got scared and let out a sort of husk or a growl, and it ran away. It was about 3 a.m. for them, and it scared them too. So they heard some things as well. Anyway, like I said, if you have any information on what this could have been, then please do share it with me, because I have trouble just not thinking about this. So I was 11 at this point, and I used to wake up at like 3 a.m. constantly when I slept alone. This would always happen when I would sleep in my room. I have no problem sleeping alone in my grandmother's house, for instance. And it really messed up my mind, but I got used to it over time, I guess. Sometimes, though, I felt really anxious, and I would feel like I was being watched. Then I would immediately rush to my parents' room. And on this particular event, I woke up at 3 a.m. like normal, and felt so anxious that I didn't even have a second thought, and straight up ran to my parents' room. They took me in, and I slept in between them, and after like 3 hours I woke up again, which is odd because I always slept peacefully when I was with my parents. So I started checking my mum, but she wasn't there. Then I started checking for my dad, and he wasn't there either. I remember I was sandwiched between them though, if that makes sense. So I started panicking. I immediately got up and switched on the lights, and they weren't in their bed. I checked under the bed, the toilet or the washroom attached to the room, my toilet, and then I went downstairs and checked the living room, dining hall, and other toilets, and the kitchen too, and they were just nowhere to be seen. I started panicking to the point that I'm about to burst into tears. In the end, I actually did. Then I checked if their vehicles are still here or not. The vehicles are untouched. Then there was one more room left to check. It was my grandmother's room, paternal, and for some background information, she and I are not in good terms. She doesn't really love or see me as her granddaughter, from what I've seen, and she's unbothered even if my parents disappear in the middle of the night. So I banged on her door crying hopelessly, but luckily, she did open the door, and I started explaining to her what had happened. And she said, "Oh, we'll look for them in the morning then," and eventually took me in. Luckily, I slept with her, and the next morning my parents came looking for me. They didn't even know that I was not there until they woke up, and they were sleeping in that same room that I was the whole night. But I really need some answers to this. Did I just get transferred to a different reality or something? I don't know, but this experience just really messed me up. I mean, my parents literally just were not there. It's honestly like they just disappeared. This happened to me when I was a teenager, some years ago, but I still think about it sometimes. So me and my 4 friends were on this 1-hour bus ride to go to my parents' house just to hang out. We were sitting and chatting in the back of the bus. The bus is empty, except for us and this middle-aged man sitting a couple of seats away from us. He looked like a normal businessman, I guess, on his way to work or something, wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase. After a while, we noticed that he was behaving kind of weirdly. He was chugging down beers rapidly, which is not that common on this bus, and also it was in the middle of the day. He was also pretty openly flipping through an adult magazine and kind of muttering to himself as well. And I mean, okay, weird, but we didn't really get too bothered by it. After a while, though, he then began to approach us, sitting closer and small-talking to us a bit, asking how old we were, where we were headed, and so on. We kind of just reply politely, but try to end the conversation pretty quickly since he's creeping us out so much. apart from the beer drinking and the magazine, you can really sense that something is wrong with this guy. I mean, he's grinding his teeth a lot and has this blank stare like he's looking right through you, not really there, if that makes sense. Anyway, when we stop talking to him after a while, he just sort of sits there silently and stares at us for a while, breathing heavily like he's getting more and more agitated. And after a minute or so, he suddenly leans forward and pulls down the sleeve of his shirt. On his arm, he has a big pair of sharp-looking scissors duct taped to his arm, with the sharp end pointing up towards his hand. He starts stretching out his arm and making sure that we all see the scissors and says, "Does this make you respect me? Am I getting your respect now?" We just sort of sit there with our mouths open. I'm terrified at this point, not really sure what to say or do, and panicking because I'm not sure what this guy is capable of. After a moment, he leans back again and continues staring at us, not saying anything more, and we don't say anything either, afraid to set him off, I guess. We get off at the next station, all jittery and full of adrenaline after that weird encounter. If I wasn't a clueless teenager, I would have called the police at that point, but we didn't, and I still think about it sometimes and wonder what a guy like that, who is obviously unhinged, is capable of. And if he ever did something worse than just scare some teenagers by acting crazy. So, believe me that it is with extraordinary skepticism that I relay this story to you all, but I'm at the end of my rope. So, 2 days ago, my husband, 43-year-old male, and I, 46-year-old male, were in Hollywood Forever Cemetery on our way to a celebrity grave that we go to fairly regularly, even weekly in the summers. I passed a rather unremarkable grave en route to it, and just after, I remember that I saw a young man in front of it who looked at me and said, "Hey, we were born in the same year." I turned to my husband and said, "This is going to sound terrible," but cutting myself off, hoping that I'd have nothing to tell him as I approached the grave to confirm what I had heard. I moved the succulents surrounding the dates aside and really didn't want to see that the year was, in fact, 1977. My husband came over and I was speechless. He saw the 1977 and explained what I had heard. I tried not to make too much of it, but how exactly does one accomplish that? On the way out, I had to stop by again. The energy around the space had worsened, and I asked my husband to hang back this time, having felt specifically that his presence was not wanted because he couldn't see what I saw. At the grave, I felt as though he had asked in some way if I was going to make a spectacle of him now. I tried to assure him no, but I don't think he trusts me. Before the line went dead, so to speak, I had this feeling that he didn't want me to tell anyone about this. At this point, I should explain that these occurrences, they were not completely uncommon to me as a child. I don't actually see these things, but remember seeing them as a memory, I guess, seconds after the experience. Some more background too is that I was fascinated with the supernatural from an early age. I was in the gifted and talented program in grammar school, and every independent study project that we self-assigned was on some feature of the paranormal. I became obsessed with tarot cards and carried them around everywhere in a repurposed index card box. And to be honest, I just never thought that the things that I saw were uncommon. When I was around 8 or 9 and in summer camp, and I'm sure a teenage softball counselor instructed the other boys at practice to beat me up before he joined, because I was more interested in doing readings than sports of any kind. The fight was interrupted and I was brought to the nurse and then the owner's office where my parents were called. They came, threatened suit, and made sure the counselor was fired, and that I knew that my camp would be comped for the next however many years. Nevertheless, they blamed me for it the whole way home. I threw the tarot cards down the incinerator and have tried to keep all of it under wraps ever since, and have developed into I guess you could call a total skeptic as my adult life began, disbelieving and forgetting what happened to me in my youth. But 2 days later, and this experience is still sitting with me, and I don't like the feeling. I told a trusted friend, and while his reaction was unremarkable, later today during a movie I was enjoying and focused on, I saw a light that would be difficult to describe in words. Very symmetrical, as solid as a crystal but made entirely of light. I asked my husband if he saw it, and when he replied no, it disappeared and my glasses fogged up. I know that sounds crazy, but they filled from the bottom up and it was weird. I took them off and asked my husband to turn on the light, which took a minute. I took my glasses off to clean them, my line of vision still blurry without the glasses. When he turned the light on, everything was clear as day though. And though this is nowhere near as concrete as a date literally written in stone, I cannot help but feel the two are connected and was filled with the same negative energy that I felt at that grave. Anyway, I expect telling the world about this is not going to go over too well, but I'm just losing my mind over this and I'm desperate for some feedback and or direction. I'll update this if anything remarkable happens after I finish this, but anyway, thanks in advance if you have any information or help or whatever that you can pass on. This happened around 2021 in India, around COVID period when the lockdowns were still very much in effect. My dad, he used to live in another city, my brother was in college, and my mum had a government job, so she had to go to her office every day, which meant that I was basically left alone from like 10 a.m. to around 6 p.m. Now, we used to live in an apartment unit, but it had two doors. One was the main door and the other one was located in the biggest bedroom, basically my parents' room, but the door was clearly locked with an actual lock from the outside, and it also had a metal sliding door as well. It was the one with the chain structure. I'm from India, so you can Google elevators to find out what I'm talking about, but it was also locked from the outside as well. We had a ring bell on the outside, but it was just sort of connected to a small bulb in the bedroom. Sorry for this being so long, but you have to get the gist of this area to understand this story. So, one day at around 12 p.m. I was in my room, which was basically adjacent to my parents' room, and I felt, I don't know, sort of weird, so I just went to check their room. I went to the room to see the bulb blinking, and somebody was ringing the doorbell. My mum used to say to ignore it because if it was somebody that we knew, then they would never ring this. They would know that the real door was at another side of the house. So I stood there for a moment when the person started knocking really hard on the door, like it was straight up rattling. But the thing was, due to the metal gate in front of it, it would be very hard to put your hand inside to knock at the actual door. Even I couldn't put more than half of my palm in there. I was also a teen back then, so I wasn't that big. And this man was straight up banging on it somehow. I got scared and called my mum, who told me not to panic, but I was really weirded out by that, so I locked my parents' door with the lock that they had and went downstairs to chill in my brother's room. It was one of those days where my mum straight up wouldn't return till like 8 p.m, so I was alone for a long time, and I was scared to even go upstairs at this point. Around 6 p.m, our helper auntie came, and I was a little better that somebody else was in the house at this point. And during that time, I used to take private tuitions, and my teacher used to come at around 7:30, so I felt better that I'd be having some people over soon. Our main door had a big window just beside it, so whenever someone was at the door, we used to open the window to check who it was before opening it. But Auntie had a bad habit of opening it without checking. Like, you sort of memorize the timings of people, so you open it because you know that it's going to be them. Fortunately that day, when the doorbell rang, she opened the window and then she came to my brother's room to tell me that I apparently had a cake delivery. Thing was, I didn't, obviously. So I went out to check through the window and there was a man with a cap hiding his face holding a very small box. Now, a cake box is very square and big, right? Even a pound cake has a pretty big box, and In India, we have a very small sweet box, so imagine like a 100-gram sweet box being called a cake box. And I asked him who the delivery was for. He didn't give me any name, not even the company, just told me that it was for our flat. I called my mother and asked if she had made the delivery, and she didn't know what I was talking about. So the dude was just like, accept the box and open the door. And by some miracle, my teacher walked up the stairs and asked what was happening. The dude saw my teacher and instantly ran up the stairs. We lived on the first floor, and we let our teacher enter. Later, when my mum inquired about a delivery guy coming to our flat with our security guard, he said that he wasn't there at his post for around half an hour when it had happened, and we didn't have any CCTVs in our building, so nobody actually saw him. Now, all of this, it definitely shook me up a bit, and I asked my mum to at least come quickly from her office on the next day, and I didn't stay upstairs when I was home alone too. It was a weird experience, and I still have no idea what that guy wanted, but the fact that he wanted to get us to open the door probably means that he wanted in on our house, and after that, I'm confident that what he wanted was no good. This happened when I was about 9 or something. I'm not completely sure. But my friend and I were playing in my room with Barbies. We took a quick break when she had to go pee. I decided that it would be fun to hide behind my door to scare her. When I stood up and wanted to hide behind my door, I saw some sort of a creature though. I always thought of it as some sort of an alien, but it could be something else. It for sure did not look human though. I don't know how it looked exactly, but I do have a vague memory of how it looked. This being because it was just so long ago. When I saw it, I felt intense fear though. That I remember clearly. I couldn't move or breathe and my heart was going crazy. I don't know for how long I stood there, but eventually I walked out of my room and my friend came out of the bathroom. We both went inside my room and we just went to play again. At that moment, I don't remember what happened, but still felt extremely scared. I must have looked scared too, because she kept asking me if I was okay. I'm not sure when, but maybe a few days or weeks later, I started to remember what happened that day and got extremely scared to sleep. I never told my parents, and I mostly kept it to myself. They just had to deal with me being scared, I guess, but I told my little brother a few years after it happened. But every time I talked about it, or every time that he would joke about it, he didn't believe me. I would freak out and this intense fear would just fill up my entire body. The picture of it standing there and the fear I felt, it always stuck with me. I recently talked about it with my oldest brother because my younger one brought it up as a joke. My oldest brother really does believe that it could be an alien of some sort, since he also believes to have seen one when he was younger as well. So, does anyone have the same experience or any idea of what this could have been? I'm also planning to ask my younger brother if he remembers me telling him any details about how it looked, but yeah, we'll see how that goes. I was at a friend's house for a weekend with a bunch of people, and we all went for a walk at some point. She lives right at the edge of the countryside, where there's fields and woods and whatnot, so we went down this forest path. Me and this other guy, we started exploring a bit deeper into the trees, and we'd gone quite far down a hill into the thicker trees. But then, there was this clearing. There was a big log laying on the ground, and resting on it was a skinned deer. No bones or anything, just the skin and its head and antlers. The head, though, was on the log, eyes missing, and the skin was just sort of draped down the front of it. But beside it was a crucifix made out of planks, not just sticks, and tied up with bale string. Me and this guy freaked out a bit, and I called out to our other friends to come and see, but He told me not to show them because they'd find it too disturbing. He then shook it off and started climbing back up, but I just stared at it for ages, so long that he waited for me and told me to walk away from it. There was also this string attached to the crucifix that ran further into the woods, but following it probably wouldn't have been a good idea, so I went back. I still cannot comprehend what it was, though. Some kind of pagan ritual? Some kind of prank? I mean, not many people walk this forest path besides locals walking their dogs. Plus, we'd come pretty far off the path at this point, too. My friend that lived there said that people didn't hunt in these woods, but I didn't want to push it with questions since I'd been told not to tell her. I understood as well. I mean, I wouldn't want to know that there was something like that going on in the woods behind my house, but I find that the lack of answers has me thinking about it more and more. I often think about it and think about the fact that it was just the beginning of a horror movie where all my friends and I are killed off one by a forest witch or something. I mean, it was the perfect setup. Friends hanging out at a country house for a weekend, two idiots go deep into the woods and find something disturbing, death ensues. Whatever the case may be, though, I still feel it was kind of a bad omen at least. Unless I just really don't know anything about hunting and that this is regular practice for people who hunt deer in the woods or something. Can anyone offer me some insight on this? Was this a sick joke? A deeper meaning to it? Or is this regular hunting setup? What if it's a curse? What if seeing this cursed me, and if sharing all of this now will activate the curse or something? I guess I'll have to see, but like I said, my thoughts have gone wild on this because I just really want to know what this is. So I live in the UK, Devon, with my dog. It's important to note that there's a huge expanse of woods behind the house that I live in. Now, early last month, this thing that looks and sounds exactly like me began to show itself directly to me, but I fear it's actually been around for much, much longer than that. About 4 years ago, my parents, grandmother and cousins were over at mine for a get-together. I remember my mother going to smoke around the back, and not even a minute after going out, she comes back in all sort of flustered and asking me why I was outside in the woods like that. She said that I was staring at her blankly. The thing is that I really wasn't. I was inside with my grandmother and dad the whole time. My mum, bless her soul, passed it off as just seeing things, and stupidly, so did I. Cut to last year though, I was in my lounge when my dog ran off into the conservatory barking like mad. This wasn't really all that surprising, as we do have quite a few rabbits and other vermin around the area. That was until, I kid you not, I heard my voice talking in the conservatory. I checked outside, but nothing at all. Last month, while cleaning the kitchen, I saw me outside in the wood. It looked one for one with me as well, and this person or thing, whatever it is, it didn't move an inch. It was like a statue. I froze in place. I guess it was more the shock of just seeing myself with my own two eyes physically. I leapt over the conservatory door, but gone. It was just gone. In the split time that it took me to go to the door, this thing was nowhere to be seen. Last Saturday, I was upstairs on a work assignment when I heard my voice asking to be let in. My dog was going absolutely nuts and got worse when this thing was clawing and scratching at my windows and door. I instantly contacted the police, and I'm away at my parents' house for the time being. I don't know what to tell people or if they'll even believe me. I really want this to end. So if you have any advice, then that would be much appreciated, because I am dreading when I see this thing again or what I'll do. I, a female in my 20s, was in a new city, trying to navigate back to my hotel. It was beginning to get dark out, so I started getting anxious and picked up my pace, even though I was on a main road and there were still lots of people around me. In my rush, though, I turned down the wrong road, unfortunately. After a very short amount of time, I noticed the road looked pretty empty, and it was definitely darker further down it. It gave me the creeps, which made me realize that I must have turned down the wrong road, so I turned around to go back to the main road. But that was when I noticed that some guy was walking close behind me. I'm not exactly sure how to explain how close he was to me. Not so close that he was in my personal space, but he was close enough that it was uncomfortable. He looked creepy too. He was wearing a black sweater with the hood pulled up. His hands were in his hoodie's front pocket, and it looked like he might have been holding something too. I only got a brief glimpse of the front of him because right after I turned around, he quickly turned around too and sped walked away from me, back onto the main road and then vanished around a corner. It sure seemed like he was stalking me, and it was really weird, especially with his hands in his pockets like that. And I mean, why did he turn around right after I turned around too? And why did he walk away like that? Did he suddenly realize that he also went down the wrong road? I seriously doubt that. Every summer, my family and relatives would always rent a cabin in different parts of Sweden, and it was always wonderful for weeks on end. This one time, when I was about 10 or 12 years old, I saw something that still sticks with me 13 years later. We rented a cabin in the upper south of Sweden, far away from any neighbors or cities. We were staying up late one night playing cards, and I just got a laser pen from my grandpa. At around 12 or 1 in the morning, I went outside to see how far my pen could reach into the forest. I was sort of standing on the grass a few steps away from the cabin, and a few steps away from the tree line. It was a full moon, and I was not at all afraid or feeling creeped out from the dark forest or anything, and just stood there playing with the laser for a bit. But suddenly I just got a really bad feeling, a mixture of sort of true fear and of being watched. I looked around, but it just seemed to be me there, until I saw a white face with black hollow eyes among the trees. Even though the eyes were black holes, I could see that it was looking at me as it passed by like it was walking very fast, but its face was turned toward me. It had a black hooded long cape and black long hair hanging down under the hood. It was really tall, like 2.5 to 3 meters, and moved so quick that it's just not possible for a human to move that fast. Also, the silence was so weird. It made no sound when I really should have heard branches snapping and leaves rustling while it moved, but there was nothing. I completely froze when I saw it, and didn't know if I actually saw what I saw. But I didn't want to find out if it was real or not, so I just ran back inside, and I didn't go out at night alone again after that. I have no idea what it was that I saw, but I never have seen the same thing again. I remembered it when I heard a story of someone seeing a pale face with black hair in a lake once. I tried drawing it, but it didn't turn out that good, so I don't know if it helps or makes my story clearer or whatever, but anyone who knows what it could have been or has had a similar experience or encounter or a sighting or whatever, I would really love to hear it, because this is something that I just cannot forget. So, I live in a 3-bedroom apartment with my husband and cat. We've been living here for a little over a year now, and in the past year we've experienced some unexplainable phenomena, I guess you could say. The most common being doors being opened after we shut them. We shut a door, we leave or walk away and come back and the door is fully opened again. We've also noticed heaters being turned on, and neither of us have turned them on. But we've brushed a lot of this stuff off, as we do have a cat and we're both ADD, so we figure maybe we just forgot about opening a door or whatever. But the more it happens, the more we question it, because all of our doors have doorknobs, so it's not like she can grab them and twist them. And we might forget things from time to time, but not as often as we've been noticing things. I've had it happen a couple of times where I'm showering and I hear the door open, but I look and it's shut. I've also experienced the door opening while I'm in the shower and nobody is there. The apartment community is older, but the vintage magic tricks my husband collects should be even older. I told my husband the other day that if there is a spirit in the apartment, it's probably from his vintage magic trick collection. We joke about it from time to time. I really don't know if spirits can just attach themselves to inanimate objects like they do in The Conjuring or not. But if they could, you would think that they would be generalized to where the magic tricks are located. But all of the instances have been throughout the apartment. Anyways, the reason I'm sharing this today is because this morning, my husband woke me up early this morning asking what I wanted. I didn't understand what he meant because, I was asleep. And he said that he heard me say his name. Later in the morning, he asked me if I remembered saying his name at all. I told him that I might have been sleep talking or whatever, but I don't really talk in my sleep, usually. Actually, I don't think I ever have. At least nobody has ever said anything about it. Plus, where he heard the voice was not in the bedroom anyway. I decided to look into spirits mimicking people and found here on good old Reddit that this is actually pretty common apparently. If that was a spirit or whatever, what does it mean if a spirit is mimicking you though? Should we look further into this, or am I just being dramatic about it? I really don't know. I don't feel scared or concerned by it, I guess. At least not yet, but should I be? My story is from 2014. I was 19 years old and it happened in the middle of the day, between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. I can't remember exactly. I was in Morocco, in a very small village of 30 people, near a beach in the Atlantic coast. There were 2 dogs in front of the house to protect it. My family wanted to go to the beach, but I was starting to get flu symptoms, so I decided to stay in the house and just rest, even if I would be alone all day. I didn't want to catch a cold at the beach or whatever. From now on, I have to say that I did not take any medication or anything else to feel better, so it's not the case of hallucinations or anything. But I was laying in bed, just reading a fantasy book. No music, no TV, nothing that could do any sort of noise or whatever. At some point, I heard the 2 dogs barking really loudly, as if an unknown person was coming or whatever. I went to the window quickly, but nobody was there. No family member, no stranger, nobody. A few seconds after hearing the dogs barking, I started to notice that I was hearing another noise, a very strange noise coming from the kitchen. It was like whispers. It was as if 2 or 3 women were whispering some sort of incantations in the kitchen. At that, I was terrified. I didn't know where these whispers were coming from. It was not from the pipes, nor from the wind or anything. There was no wind that day. But it was just there, floating in the air, and I couldn't do anything to make it stop. After about 3 minutes, the whispers and the barking, they stopped simultaneously. Since that day, I'm always afraid to be alone in remote houses like that, especially if no one is there. And I'm also afraid of dogs as well, I guess. I never knew what happened that day, and I never actually asked anyone what it could have been. I've never had any other weird experiences before or since then. I'm not the type of person to believe in things like this, so I try to have a rational explanation about this experience, but honestly, I just can't explain it. And so I would be happy to get your theories as to what you think this might have been. So, I used to work at a nursing home. As most of our patients are the elderly, there's obviously plenty of deaths that occur at our facility. I worked down in the dementia care ward, and there was a lovely resident that I cared for. Her name was Beth. She was unfortunately put on hospice a few weeks ago, and she met her untimely death 3 days ago. She was 92. As a residential care associate, it was my job to clean out the room for a new resident. As I walked into her room, it felt really cold. Too cold, in fact. And that is weird because all nursing homes are always hot because the elderly get pretty cold easily. I just felt a kind of cold that was bone-chilling though. I tried to shrug it off as I took the sheets off the bed, but as I was bending over to take off the fitted sheet, I swear to you that I felt a push. It felt like cold hands pushed me with strength that I'd never felt before. It happened so quick that I was just confused and scared. I quickly grabbed all the sheets and I booked it out of that door. But when I turned my head around, I saw it. I saw a human-like figure, a shadow in the closet. It was a quick look, so I couldn't really identify the person, but I can't help but think that it was Beth playing a prank on me before she departed to the afterlife, as me and her would always play pranks on one another while I took care of her. But to be honest, I don't know if that is actually the case. So yeah, that's my encounter with the paranormal, and I really don't know what to think about it. So, for context, my parents bought this small clock from a thrift store about 4 years ago. That's whenever my experience, and also subsequently my parents' experience, with this spirit or demon or whatever it is, really started to take fruition. Whenever my dad first hung the clock up on the wall, I got this sense of uneasiness, and it felt like something was watching me. I chalked it up to me just being paranoid at the time. Whenever I went to sleep that night, though, I was woken up at like 1 in the morning due to some knocking on my bedroom door. I didn't get up to get out of bed because I was afraid of what could hypothetically be on the other side. I ended up falling back to sleep, and I get up the next morning at around 11 in the morning. I was eating cereal at the kitchen table. My mum was making breakfast and had almost all the cabinets open, and my dad was outside working. Why does this information matter? Because all of a sudden, a bag of chips that I had in one of the cabinets gets literally flung across the kitchen. My mum was near the cabinet the chip bag had just got flung from, but I know for a fact that she didn't touch them. After that weird occurrence, nothing else really happened for like 2 straight days. Everything weirdly seemed to just go back to semi-normal again. Until everything just wasn't normal again. It was 11 p.m. on Friday in October of 2021. Me and my dad were both awake at that time, and we were just talking. He mentions that he feels something burning on his arm. He looks at it, and there's 3 scratches that had just appeared out of literally nowhere on his arm. All of a sudden, too, our box fan that we used to fall asleep to every night, it was just plugged in and in use, mind you, just turns off sort of randomly. I get up, walk out of my bedroom, and then the microwave turns on by itself, and then the kitchen light, and then the washing machine as well. And then every electronic and light that I'd mentioned was turned on, all got turned off together at the exact same time. Everything just goes suddenly quiet. Mind you, the power was still working. We checked that, so it was weird. The very next day after all of this, me and my dad got my grandparents to exorcise the house. I got some holy water, my grandmother had some anointing oil, my dad had a cross and some sage, and my grandpa had a Bible as well. Each of us go throughout the house, cleansing every last inch of it. After we were done, the house just suddenly began to smell like stink bugs for like 5 whole minutes. And then, just as quickly as it had arrived, it left. And nothing has happened since then. I mean, small things happen every now and again, like me waking up every single night in a cold sweat at 3 in the morning. But then again, I can't really sleep all that well, so it probably doesn't mean much. Oh, and I'm also really depressed now too. Like, I was super happy 3 weeks ago, but now I'm just sad and I find it hard to leave my room. So, my question for all of you guys is, have I been or am I living with a demon, a ghost? It's definitely something, because if it wasn't something, then I wouldn't be talking about it and asking for answers as to what this might possibly be, I guess. Is this something that I should just get used to, or is there something that I can do about it? About 2 years ago, I was 13, almost 14 at the time, and I was still quite immature for my age, and enjoyed role-playing as Mortal Kombat characters, or fighting with my little brother, who is now almost 13. By the way, I live in Whitefish, Montana, near a place called Olney, surrounded by woods pretty much. I also have horses basically everywhere on our property. That's important for later to know. Anyways, me and my little brother decided to go outside to the back of my house, where there's a road that is about 400 feet in length, leading up to, I would say, about a maybe 8 round hay bales sort of section, to pretend to fight each other with wooden swords that we had custom detailed and made ourselves. I was cosplaying as Sub-Zero, and my brother was just wearing regular clothes, and we started walking away from our house towards the hay bales because we intended to fight on them. Now, once we had gotten about halfway there, which took like a minute, we were almost at the end of our horse pen that was fenced in next to our house, reaching out halfway to the bales. I remember my brother leaning down to tie one of his shoes that had a messed up lace on the right one, and, getting straight to the point, what we both saw still makes me very nervous and sweat when I think about it. I looked over at him and immediately heard a loud sort of trampling or sprinting sound coming from the hay bale area. I looked up and at them, and I saw what I thought to be something resembling a human, but was extremely tall. The hay bales were stacked 2 up and I think 4 across, and whatever this was, it was greyish white and ran behind the bales in what I assume a pretty much straight line, then going past them and disappearing into the woods that went from behind the hay all the way around my house, besides the main gravel road that then brings you to the highway. I immediately freaked out and tried to yell to my brother right beside me, but only managed to basically talk super fast to him with an inside voice. He as well looked up very quickly because he had heard the running too. There was a sort of small pause where my brother sounded confused, and then, right as he did it came back running to the hay bales once again, stopping this time behind the 3rd row, of 2 stacked on one another. This thing, though, was so tall that we could see almost the entirety of the thing's head, and then it ran kind of forward a little bit, and then straight backwards towards the woods, never to be seen after that. Now, this all happened in the span of maybe about 5 or 8 seconds, and saying that whatever this thing was running is really a complete understatement. You see, it had been running at least 40 miles an hour, at least, or fast enough where we could both barely make out what it looked like in detail, just the overall appearance. What I remember, though, is that it looked to me as kind of like the rake, but way taller and more slender looking and really grey. I remember my brother yelling, "What the heck was that?" And literally, so did I, as we full-on bolted back to the house in probably 15 seconds. I got there first, yanked my brother in the door, and slammed it harder than any other door I've slammed in my life, locking it behind us quickly. Of course, my parents didn't believe us at all, even though I was on the verge of either tears or a heart attack from the adrenaline. They said that it was probably a moose in the end, but I've seen moose at that time and since then, and this, I can assure you, was no moose. Hopefully I'll get a better answer here than from them, but if not, that's okay, I guess, and to be honest, I really just do hope people believe me. It feels like a dream thinking back on it, just as it did the day after the incident.
It's kind of weird too that I remembered this again suddenly today while watching a military crawler horror story on YouTube. Probably because my mind is trying to block out as a false memory or a dream, whatever that event was, even though I actually have a second eyewitness in my brother. And quite honestly, if my brother wasn't there with me, I seriously would doubt myself. I would doubt that I would ever believe what I actually saw. But because he saw it too, and we both freaked out at what it was, I have no doubt in my mind that I'm not crazy, and we saw something. Years ago, when I was pregnant, we were just getting ready to go to bed, and it was late, about 1:30 in the morning, when this woman knocked on the door, and my husband answered. She was clearly high and jittery and looking around everywhere. She asked if she could use my toilet. My husband obviously said no, this was not a public restroom. We both got a really bad vibe from her though. She was quite a big woman and clearly something just wasn't right with her. She started to try to open our security door at that point, rattling the handle, but we've always been very conscious of keeping it locked the minute that we walk in. My husband told her to go away and he shut the door. Then she started banging on the door, screaming that she needed to use the toilet. My husband opened the door again and told her to get lost or he was calling the cops. She stopped, froze, and for about 20 seconds just sort of stood there, staring at us, and then she turned around and walked away. We turned off all the lights and we looked through the blinds and saw her next door talking to two people at that point. I said to my husband that I think that was a setup for a home invasion, and he agreed. The thing though is that I'd actually seen this woman around before quite a few times, so she could have known that I was heavily pregnant, and that would make us a good target, because we would have been compliant. People have a tendency to be more compliant when they're trying to protect their family, and I think that she must have followed me home. Thankfully after that I never saw her again, but even that is kind of weird, right? We were on a road trip to Queensland and back. We were in no hurry, so we were taking the scenic route. And at one stage we pulled up to a truck stop on a highway that ran alongside the forest. It was a very isolated place. So we were sitting there trying to get my son some snacks and just having a break, when a ute pulled up behind us. The guy inside sat there for ages, just sort of staring at us, and I said to my husband, "This guy's creeping me out, let's go." So we started to pack up, and that's when he got out of his ute. He was walking towards us as we got in our car, and before we knew it, he was there, and he asked for a cigarette. My husband said that he only smokes rollies, and he didn't have any rolled, and the guy said, "I'll wait." He never said more than that in the entire encounter. He leaned in and he stared at me with the creepiest predatory look that I've ever seen, and this really weird grin, the whole time keeping one hand behind him as well. Suddenly, he leant right into the car, and at that moment, my 2-year-old said hi, and it was then that this guy just backed away like his butt was on fire. Didn't wait for his cigarette, he just bolted back to his ute and we took off. We always thought that he had bad intentions and just didn't realize that we had a kid in the car, and when he did, that maybe threw him off. We both agree that it was the creepiest encounter of our lives, and we were pretty sure of his intentions. The really creepy thing though is that it wasn't until we were driving away that we realized that we were in the Belanglo State Forest where serial killer Ivan Milat had buried all of his victims. There was always a theory that he didn't actually do the work alone, and that actually one of his brothers was involved, but who knows. Anyway, that might not be related to this story at all, but it always just crossed my mind. When I was about 7 or 8, my family moved into an old farmhouse in VA.
I have a little brother. My brother is 3 years younger than me, so he was around 4 or 5 at the time. This house had an upstairs which had 2 rooms. My brother and I were very excited about this because we always had to share a room. He picked the room to the left of the stairs. It was nice, but in the corner of his room it had a tiny door that led into a sort of small attic. It gave me an eerie feeling, so I couldn't understand why he would pick that room, but he was just determined on that being his room. I, though, took the room to the right, which had a little window that looked out over the farm. It was great. We set our rooms up and we unpacked. Fast forward to a few weeks later, my mum decided that it was time for us to take a nap. In my room, of course. For context, I had a little red rocking chair with Dalmatians with my name painted on it. It was really cute. I had definitely outgrown it at this point though, because it was made for me when I was a toddler. And well, when we went to lay down for our nap, everything was okay. But then, out of nowhere, my brother started freaking out and screaming, clinging to my mother for dear life. My mother tried to soothe him, but nothing was helping. She asked my brother what was wrong. My brother pointed to the rocking chair and said, "There's a little girl in Sissy's chair, and she doesn't want us up here." He was so inconsolable that my mum had to bring us downstairs. That is the first time the entity made herself known. I never saw her, but I'd always feel her presence or have nightmares about her. The weird thing is that I'd only see her in my dreams if I was in my room sleeping. So as you can imagine, that quickly turned into my brother and I sleeping in my mum's bed. Most of the time she would target my brother, but he'd never stay in his room. And one night, my mum talks to me and my brother into sleeping in my bed upstairs just to have a break. We only agreed to do it if we could leave the light room on. She agreed. Well, we all fall asleep and I wake up in my room. I'm alone. Everything is the same, but like I said, I'm alone and something is telling me to get up and go to the window. I don't know why, but I do. As soon as I get to the window, though, I see a little girl run to the side of the house and start crawling up the side to my window. Remember, I'm on the 2nd floor. I'm sort of startled awake before she can reach me, and I sit up in bed and realize that I'm reliving my dream. I'm panicking, staring at the window, and again something is telling me to go over to it. But instead, I just dart down the stairs to my mum's room and find my brother laying on the floor near the end of my mum's bed. We didn't say much to each other besides agreeing, and we felt safe and near mum. I learned years later that my brother had the same dream that night, apparently. Fast forward a couple of years later, we moved to a new home. We had to share rooms again, but we were fine with that. We were scared from all the years of dealing with this entity. We thought that we would finally have some peace, but we were very wrong. Shortly after moving, the same stuff started happening again. This time, I actually saw her. It was dark out and my mum needed something from her car. I tell her that I'll go and get it, and as soon as I retrieved what she needed from the car, I turn around toward the house to go back in, but I look over into the field next to our house and I see her appear and disappear, and every time she reappeared, she was a little bit closer. I never ran so fast in my life. I ran into the house absolutely hysterical. I told my mum and stepdad, and they were obviously concerned. Mum didn't believe that she had followed us to the new house, but now she did. We made the conclusion that she attached herself to my rocking chair, so we moved again, and when we did, we left my rocking chair at that house, and since then we haven't seen her and I haven't dreamed about her. Growing up after this, I always wondered if she was just an evil entity or maybe a demon in disguise. I don't know, but something told me that there was something wrong with her.